Welcome back, travelers and dreamers, to our hearth in the quiet hours. The fire burns steadily tonight, casting warm light across our shared space as we continue our journey through the lore of Elder Scrolls, Oblivion Remastered. In our previous gatherings, we witnessed the fall of an empire, explored the realms beyond our world, and examined the guilds and factions that provided structure to Imperial society. Tonight we turn our attention to the land itself, the province of Cyrodiil, heart of the empire, and stage upon which the drama of the Oblivion crisis unfolded. Cyrodiil, a land of remarkable diversity, where snow-capped mountains give way to rolling vineyards, where ancient forests stand beside pristine lakes, where bustling cities rise from pastoral countryside. This central province of Tamriel encompasses landscapes as varied as the people who inhabit them, each region with its own character, climate, and cultural flavor. The land shapes its people, and the people shape their land in return. In the northern city of Bruma, sturdy stone buildings withstand harsh mountain winters, while the southern port of Anvil embraces the warm breezes of the Abyssinian Sea with open courtyards and airy architecture. The wines of Skingrad reflect the unique soil and climate of the West Weald, just as the fisherfolk of Bravil adapt their lives to the rhythms of the Nibenay River and its tributaries. As the crackling flames mark the passage of time, allow your mind to wander the roads and paths of Cyrodiil, from the magnificent white gold tower at the empire's center to the humblest village nestled in distant valleys. Each location holds stories waiting to be discovered, histories layered like the very earth beneath our feet. Our journey begins at the heart of it all, the Imperial City, seat of emperors and nexus of power for an empire that once spanned the continent. Chapter 1. The Heart of an Empire. Rising from a perfect circular island at the center of Lake Bruma stands the Imperial City, capital of Tamriel, and the greatest urban center in the known world. Its gleaming white stone walls, visible for miles across the Heartlands, reflect both the practical concerns of defense and the symbolic aspirations of an empire that once ruled across continents. This is no mere city, but a monument to imperial ambition, a physical embodiment of order imposed upon chaos, civilization carved from wilderness. What makes the Imperial City immediately distinctive is its perfect circular design, a massive outer wall encompassing 6 districts arranged around a central palace district. This precise geometric layout was not original to human builders, but inherited from the Aelids, who first constructed the White Gold Tower and the city surrounding it. When Alessia's rebellion overthrew the elven masters of Cyrodiil, the victorious humans claimed not just territory, but architecture, repurposing the magnificence of Aelid engineering to serve their own imperial vision. The centerpiece of the city, indeed, of the entire province, is the White Gold Tower itself, soaring above all other structures, with a majesty unmatched by any building in Tamriel. Constructed by the Aelids During the Merithic era, the tower predates human civilization in Cyrodiil by centuries, if not millennia. Its gleaming white stone, rumored to have been quarried from the crystalline mountains of Aetherius itself, remains unmarred by time, despite the passing of thousands of years. From certain angles, in certain lights, the tower seems almost to glow with its own inner radiance, a quality that has inspired countless myths, legends, and theological speculations throughout the ages. Surrounding the tower is the Imperial Palace District, the most restricted and heavily guarded area of the city. Here stand the Elder Council chambers, where the governance of the Empire takes tangible form, the Imperial Legion headquarters, coordinating military operations across provinces, and the quarters of the various ministries and bureaus that administer everything from taxation to diplomatic relations. Access to this central district remains tightly controlled, even during normal times, with dedicated guards checking documentation and scrutinizing visitors before allowing passage through the limited entry points along its perimeter. In the terrible days following Emperor Uriel Septim's seventh assassination, this control intensified further, with Legion forces sealing most access completely, while the Elder Council struggled to maintain governance amidst uncertainty regarding succession. During the culmination of the Oblivion crisis, the Palace District witnessed the ultimate confrontation between Mehrunes Dagon and Martin Septim, a battle whose outcome transformed the district physically through Martin's sacrifice and the creation of the dragon statue in the Temple of the One, which stands as permanent memorial to the end of the Oblivion crisis and the Septim dynasty alike. The streets of the Market District present a carefully organized chaos, noisy, crowded, and bustling at all hours, yet subject to strict regulations regarding trading hours, permissible goods, quality standards, and taxation. Imperial Watch maintains constant patrols here, less concerned with serious crime than with the mundane violations that might disrupt the commercial functioning so crucial to the city's survival. Pickpockets work the crowds while market inspectors check weights and measures. Foreign merchants haggle in multiple languages, while tax collectors make their rounds of registered businesses, and through it all flows the constant exchange of goods, services, and currency that keeps the empire functioning. Across from the Market District stands the Arena District, centered around the grand amphitheater, where the blood sport that serves as the city's most popular entertainment unfolds daily before enthusiastic crowds. The arena itself is an architectural masterpiece, a massive oval structure whose tiered seating accommodates thousands of spectators while providing excellent views from every position. Beneath the public areas stretch the blue and yellow team quarters, training facilities, and the administrative offices that maintain the complex betting systems that turn bloodshed into profit for both the Empire and successful gamblers. Moving outward from this central heart, the 6 districts of the city radiate like spokes of a wheel, each with its own character and function within the greater urban organism. The Market District houses the commercial lifeblood of not just the city, but the Empire itself, a vast collection of shops, trading companies, craftspeople, and merchants whose activities generate much of the wealth that sustains Imperial operations. From humble street vendors selling fresh produce to the offices of trading companies with connections spanning continents, this district embodies the commercial energy that fuels the Empire's material prosperity. Beyond mere entertainment, the arena serves multiple social functions within Imperial culture. For the lower classes, it provides rare opportunity for advancement through combat prowess, with successful gladiators rising from poverty to celebrity and wealth if they survive long enough. For nobles and officials, It offers neutral ground for socializing across factional lines, with shared appreciation of martial skill transcending political differences, and for the Empire itself, it serves as safety valve for violent impulses that might otherwise express themselves through crime or unrest, channeling aggression into regulated competition rather than destructive chaos. The Elven Gardens District provides more refined residential space for the city's middle and upper middle classes. Merchants successful enough to afford its higher property values, minor nobility without estates in the Palace District, and the countless bureaucrats whose administrative work keeps the imperial machinery functioning. Its architecture strikes balance between practicality and aesthetics, with multi-story homes arranged around small gardens and courtyards that offer respite from urban density. Despite its name, relatively few elves actually reside here in the late Third Era, with the district's population predominantly imperial with significant Breton and Redguard minorities. The Talos Plaza district represents the most prestigious residential area accessible without special permission, housing wealthy merchants, successful guild leaders, nobility of middling rank, and distinguished individuals whose service to the Empire has earned them place within its inner rings. Architecturally impressive townhouses and small manors line streets, notably wider and better maintained than in other districts, with private guards supplementing the Imperial Watch's regular patrols. At the district's center stands an impressive statue of Tiber Septim in his aspect as the god Talos, surrounded by a circular plaza where the district's residents often gather for both formal ceremonies and casual socializing. The final district within the city proper is the Prison District, a grim reminder that even the heart of civilization requires facilities for those who violate its laws or threaten its order. Dominated by the Imperial Prison itself, a massive stone structure whose architecture emphasizes security and intimidation rather than the aesthetic refinements found elsewhere in the city. This district also houses the Imperial Watch headquarters, various judicial offices, and the administrative machinery of Imperial Justice. Few citizens enter this district voluntarily, except those employed within its institutions, with its reputation for harshness and efficiency serving as deliberate deterrent against criminal activity. Surrounding the central temple stand smaller shrines and chapels dedicated to each of the 9 divines, along with administrative buildings housing the ecclesiastical bureaucracy that coordinates religious observances throughout the Empire. Priests, scholars, and pilgrims move through streets notably quieter than other districts, with an atmosphere of contemplation prevailing even during busy periods. Unlike some imperial institutions that project power through intimidation or overwhelming presence, the religious architecture here emphasizes harmony, balance, and the sublimation of individual ego before divine principles, values reflected in the district's overall ambiance and social expectations. The Temple District centers around the Temple of the One, the most significant religious structure in the city and symbolic heart of the imperial cult. Before the Oblivion Crisis, this domed building housed the dragonfires that maintained the covenant between Akatosh and the Septim dynasty, protecting Nirn from Daedric invasion. Following Martin Septim's sacrifice and transformation into the avatar of Akatosh, the temple now houses the massive dragon statue that formed from that divine manifestation, a permanent reminder of both the crisis's resolution and the fundamental change in the relationship between Aedra and mortals that resulted from those events. The prison district gained unexpected significance during the opening moments of the Oblivion Crisis, when Emperor Uriel Septim VII used secret passages beneath the prison during his desperate attempt to escape assassination. The specific cell that connected to these hidden tunnels, occupied at that crucial moment by the prisoner who would eventually become known as the champion of Cyrodiil, represented one of history's most consequential coincidences, setting in motion the chain of events that would ultimately lead to Martin Septim's identification and the salvation of Nurn itself. Beyond the city's main circular structure lies the waterfront district, technically part of the Imperial City, but distinctly separate in both physical layout and social character, stretching along the shore of Lake Rumer. This area developed organically rather than following the precise planning evident in other districts, resulting in cramped, irregular streets lined with shabby buildings that housed the city's poorest residents. Dock workers, ship crews, unskilled laborers, and those who have fallen through the cracks of imperial prosperity create a community with its own unwritten rules and arrangements, sometimes at odds with the official governance structures that theoretically extend even here. The waterfront serves as the Imperial City's primary connection to waterborne trade, with docks handling vessels from across Tamriel and occasionally beyond. The economic activity this generates creates stark contrast between poverty and wealth, destitute residents living within sight of valuable cargoes and the profit they represent. This contradiction generates constant tension between the Imperial Watch, the Thieves' Guild, which maintains strong influence in the district, and residents caught between forces larger than themselves. During the Oblivion Crisis, the waterfront became a crucial evacuation point for citizens fleeing Daedric attacks, with its maritime connections offering escape routes when land travel became too dangerous. The architectural and social divisions within the Imperial City reflect broader patterns within imperial governance, concentric rings of access and privilege, with power concentrated at the center and diminishing outward in carefully managed gradations. Yet the city functions not through rigid separation, but through constant flow between its districts, goods from the waterfront moving through the market district to supply the Talos Plaza and Palace, citizens from the Elven Gardens attending events in the arena, official proclamations from the palace implemented through offices in multiple districts. This interdependence creates unity from diversity, much as the empire itself attempts to forge cohesion from the varied cultures and territories under its governance. For citizens living within its walls, the Imperial City represents multiple, sometimes contradictory realities simultaneously. It stands as symbol of security and permanence, its massive walls and organized legion presence creating confidence against external threats, until the Oblivion Crisis temporarily shattered this certainty. It offers opportunity for advancement through multiple pathways: commercial enterprise in the market, martial prowess in the arena, administrative service in the palace, scholarly achievement through the arcane university just outside the main walls. Yet it also imposes rigid social hierarchies, burdensome taxation, and the constant surveillance of imperial authority, constraints that many find suffocating despite the benefits of urban living. Visitors to the Imperial City often remark first upon its sheer scale. The height of the white gold tower, visible long before other structures come into view, the massive walls dwarfing anything found in provincial capitals, the crowded streets containing more people than many smaller cities in their entirety. This physical impressiveness serves deliberate symbolic purpose, communicating imperial power and permanence to both citizens and potential adversaries. The message encoded in stone and space proclaims that the empire, like its capital, stands as triumph of order over chaos, of human ambition realized through disciplined effort and organization. As we leave the Imperial City, and journey outward to explore the broader landscapes of Cyrodiil. Remember that all roads in the province eventually lead back to this central heart, the administrative nexus, cultural touchstone, and symbolic center that gives meaning and coherence to the Imperial project itself. The city represents culmination of human ambition to impose order upon an often chaotic world, a stone and mortar manifestation of the Imperial idea that unity through centralized authority creates possibility for civilization beyond what fragmented independence could achieve. Whether this grand experiment ultimately succeeds or fails, the Imperial City stands as its most perfect expression and enduring monument. In the aftermath of the Oblivion crisis, the Imperial City's symbolic significance evolved in subtle but important ways. The dragon statue in the Temple of the One created new focal point, representing both divine intervention and sacrificial heroism, qualities somewhat at odds with traditional imperial emphasis on human agency and institutional continuity. The scars left by Daedric attacks, though repaired physically, remained in collective memory as reminder that even the mightiest walls cannot guarantee absolute security against all possible threats. And the end of the Septim dynasty required reconceptualization of imperial legitimacy, with the white gold tower now representing historical continuity rather than divine right through dragon blood. Yet, despite these changes, the fundamental character of the Imperial City endured, a human society organized with unprecedented scale and complexity, maintaining traditions across generations while adapting to changing circumstances, both mundane and extraordinary. In this resilience perhaps lies the true significance of the Imperial City, not its imposing architecture or efficient governance alone, but the collective will of its inhabitants to maintain civilization even when its metaphysical foundations shift beneath them. The white gold tower still stands, the markets still bustle, the temples still receive worshippers. Life continues within the great wheel of the city, as it has for centuries before, and would for centuries to come, regardless of which dynasty claims the ruby throne. Chapter 2. The Gold Coast. Traveling westward from the Imperial City, following the gently curving arc of the Red Ring Road, until it meets the Black Road at Fort Ash, one enters the region known as the Gold Coast, Cyrodiil's western shoreline, along the Abetian Sea. This fertile strip of land between mountains and ocean derives its name from the warm golden hue that suffuses the landscape during sunset, when the dying light transforms ordinary fields and beaches into shimmering expanses that seem to glow from within. Unlike the carefully planned precision of the Imperial City, the Gold Coast evolved more organically through centuries of human habitation, with settlements positioned to take advantage of natural harbors, fertile valleys, and defensive positions against both natural hazards and historical threats. The region's development reflects continuous dialogue between human needs and natural opportunities, a landscape shaped by generations of farmers, merchants, and fisherfolk adapting to local conditions while maintaining connections to broader imperial networks and cultures. Two major cities anchor the Gold Coast: the port city of Anvil at the region's southern extent, and Kvatch perched dramatically atop a defensible plateau overlooking the surrounding countryside. Between these urban centers stretch rolling farmlands, vineyards, and fishing villages whose collective productivity has long contributed significantly to imperial prosperity. The Gold Road connects these settlements, serving as the primary trade artery that links the coast to the Imperial City and, by extension, the rest of the empire. Anvil represents the Empire's primary western port, a city whose identity and economy revolve entirely around maritime activities. Its natural harbor, protected by headlands from the worst Abetian storms, while remaining accessible to even deep-drafted vessels, provided foundation for settlement that archaeological evidence suggests predates even the First Empire of Cyrodiil. What began as simple fishing community evolved through centuries into sophisticated port, whose docks accommodate merchant vessels from High Rock, Hammerfell, Somerset, and occasionally more distant shores. The city's architecture reflects both practical maritime concerns and cultural influences absorbed through centuries of international contact. Stone buildings with thick walls withstand coastal storms, while open courtyards and colonnaded walkways provide comfortable spaces during fair weather. Redguard's decorative elements mingle with traditional imperial styles, particularly in the chapel district where foreign merchants historically made more permanent homes. The overall effect creates distinctive aesthetic, immediately recognizable to travelers familiar with other Cyrodiilic cities, a place undeniably part of the Empire, yet shaped by forces beyond imperial borders. Anvil's social structure similarly reflects its position at cultural crossroads. The city's population includes significant minorities of Redguards and High Rock Bretons, alongside the imperial majority, creating a multicultural environment where Hammerfell fashions, Breton cuisine, and traditional Colovian customs coexist and intermingle. Foreign traders maintain permanent enclaves where their distinctive languages, religions, and social practices continue under implicit imperial tolerance, creating neighborhoods whose character changes subtly as one moves through the city's winding streets. The city's governance, during the late Third Era, fell to Countess Melona Ombranox, whose husband's mysterious disappearance years earlier left her sole ruler of Anvil County, despite her youth at the time of succession. Her administration maintained reputation for competence and relative fairness, balancing traditional Colovian values with pragmatic recognition of Anvil's dependence on international trade. Under her guidance, the city weathered both economic fluctuations and the eventual horrors of the Oblivion crisis, maintaining sufficient stability to serve a crucial role as evacuation point for refugees from inland areas more severely affected by Daedric attacks. Beyond the city walls, Anvil County encompasses productive agricultural lands whose crops, particularly grapes for winemaking and hardy wheat varieties adapted to the coastal climate, supplement the primary income derived from maritime trade and fishing. Small settlements dot the countryside, typically centered around particular resources or activities: fishing villages along the coast, farming communities in fertile valleys, woodcutters' camps where the region's scattered forests provide timber for shipbuilding and construction. These rural populations maintain close economic relationships with Anvil proper, creating an interdependent network that functions as a unified economic region, despite significant lifestyle differences between city dwellers and rural inhabitants. Traveling northeast from Anvil along the Gold Road, the landscape gradually rises as coastal plains give way to increasingly dramatic terrain. Approximately halfway between Anvil and the Imperial City, atop a naturally defensible plateau with commanding views of surrounding countryside, stands Kavach, or stood Kavach, before the Oblivion crisis transformed this proud city into cautionary example of Daedric destructive capacity. Pre-crisis Kavach represented quintessential Colovian hill city, its distinctive position combining practical defensive advantages with symbolic elevation that historically signified both political importance and proximity to divine powers in Cyrodiilic culture. The city's layout followed terrain contours, rather than imposed geometric patterns, with concentric rings of development spreading downward from Castle Kvatch at the summit. Strong walls encircled the city proper, while outlying farms and smaller settlements benefited from the protection of both natural elevation and the legendary Kvatch Cavaliers, the county's elite guard unit, whose reputation for skill and discipline extended throughout western Cyrodiil. The city's history stretched back to early First Era, with evidence suggesting initial settlement predated even Alessia's rebellion against the Aelaids. Over centuries, Kvatch developed distinctive cultural identity that balanced conservative Colovian traditions with intellectual and theological sophistication, fostered by its significant chapel of Akatosh and respected educational traditions. The city maintained particular pride in its arena, second in size and prestige only to the Imperial Arena itself, which attracted competitors and spectators from across western Tamriel for regular gladiatorial competitions and special exhibitions. Kvatch's governance at the time of the Oblivion Crisis rested with Count Ormelius Goldwine, last in family line that had ruled the county for several generations. Historical accounts describe Goldwine as capable, if somewhat traditional ruler, maintaining city prosperity, while perhaps lacking imagination or flexibility that might have better prepared Kvatch for unprecedented threats. The Count perished alongside many of his guards and staff during the initial Daedric assault, his death in defense of his castle reflecting honorable end to dynasty that had guided Kvatch through generations of more conventional challenges. The destruction of Kvatch marked watershed moment in the Oblivion Crisis, the first major population center to fall completely to Daedric forces, creating shock that reverberated throughout the empire and demanded response beyond what isolated, rural attacks had previously prompted. The sequence of events began with massive Oblivion Gate opening outside the city walls, disgorging Daedric forces that quickly overwhelmed external defenses. Fires spread rapidly through the densely built city, while Daedra systematically slaughtered citizens unable to reach the chapel of Akatosh, the sole major structure to survive the assault, thanks to divine protection and the desperate courage of those who barricaded themselves within. By terrible coincidence, or deliberate Daedric intelligence, this catastrophic attack targeted city where Martin Septim, unaware of his imperial heritage, served as priest in the very chapel that would become final refuge for survivors. The convergence of Tamriel's greatest disaster with its ultimate salvation in single location suggests either cosmic irony or evidence of deeper patterns underlying seemingly random events, a philosophical question that theologians and scholars continue debating long after the crisis itself ended. In the aftermath of both the Oblivion Crisis and subsequent upheavals that marked transition from Third to Fourth Era, Kvatch faced enormous reconstruction challenges. The initial survivor population, predominantly traumatized refugees with few resources beyond desperate courage that had preserved their lives, lacked capacity for major rebuilding efforts. Significant imperial assistance eventually enabled basic reconstruction, though the new Kvatch that emerged bore little resemblance to the proud city destroyed by Daedric forces. The reconstituted settlement honored historical street patterns and key landmarks, while accepting that complete restoration remained impossible given resource limitations and population decline. Between these two urban centers, thriving Anvil and devastated Kvatch, the Gold Coast countryside maintains distinctive character, shaped by both natural conditions and human adaptations over centuries. The climate features mild, rainy winters and warm, relatively dry summers, ideal conditions for certain agricultural specialties that have defined regional identity and economy. Vineyards occupy many south-facing slopes where favorable sun exposure combines with well-drained soils to produce distinctive wine varieties, particularly reds, with characteristic mineral notes attributed to the region's unique soil composition. The coastline itself alternates between rocky headlands and small sheltered beaches where fishing communities have established footholds for generations. These villages typically center around single extended family groups, maintaining small fleets of boats suited to local conditions and target species. Their fishing practices reflect accumulated knowledge passed through generations, understanding of seasonal migration patterns, weather indicators, and specialized techniques developed through centuries of maritime experience. While politically part of either Anvil or Kavach counties, these communities maintain distinctive subcultures with their own traditions, dialects, and social practices that set them apart from both urban populations and inland farming communities. The Gold Coast's religious character similarly reflects both broader imperial traditions and local adaptations. The Chapel of Debella in Anvil naturally emphasizes aspects of the goddess particularly relevant to maritime community, her aspects as patron of art finding expression in distinctive decorative traditions among ships and buildings, while her association with beauty connects symbolically to the renowned Gold Coast sunsets that give the region its name. In Kavach, the Chapel of Akatosh maintained particularly strong presence even before its miraculous survival during Daedric attack, with the god of time receiving special devotion in city whose history stretched back to earliest human settlements in Cyrodiil. Throughout smaller settlements, religious practice often combines official imperial cult observances with local traditions barely recognized by formal theology. Fishing villages maintaining rituals to ensure safe returns and abundant catches, farming communities celebrating harvest festivals with elements dating to pre-Alessian belief systems, and family groups preserving ancestor veneration practices within framework of 9 divines worship. This layering of belief systems creates religious landscape, both formally orthodox, pragmatically diverse, pattern repeated throughout Cyrodiil, but particularly evident in regions like the Gold Coast, where traditional lifeways maintain strong continuity despite changing political superstructures. The region's wildlife deserves particular mention for both its ecological significance and its impact on human settlement patterns. The coastal waters support abundant marine life harvested by fishing communities, while inland areas host deer, wild boars, and various small game animals that supplement agricultural production in rural diets. More problematic are the minotaur populations that historically occupied certain caves and wilderness areas, creating danger for travelers and periodic threats to outlying settlements. These powerful creatures, believed by some scholars to represent degenerate remnants of ancient followers of Mori House, companion to Saint Alessia, maintain complex but generally hostile relationship with human populations, necessitating periodic hunting expeditions when particular individuals or groups become excessively aggressive. The Gold Coast's relationship with the broader empire historically balanced integration with relative independence. The region's agricultural and maritime productivity made significant economic contributions to imperial prosperity, while its position as Western Gateway provided strategic importance beyond mere resource extraction. Yet the area's distance from the Imperial City, combined with traditionally independent Colovian culture, fostered self-reliance and local governance that sometimes operated with considerable autonomy despite formal submission to imperial authority. During the Oblivion Crisis, this relative independence proved a double-edged sword. When Daedric forces targeted Kvatch, local defenders faced overwhelming attack without immediate Imperial military support, a factor contributing to the city's tragic fall. Conversely, regions like Anvil County demonstrated remarkable resilience precisely because local leadership maintained capacity for independent action when central authority became temporarily disrupted by crisis events. This pattern, centralized empire providing stability during normal periods, while local autonomy becomes crucial during extraordinary disruptions, repeats throughout Cyrodiil's history, with the Gold Coast offering particularly clear historical examples of both dynamics. In the post-crisis period, the Gold Coast faced reconstruction challenges balanced against opportunities created by changing economic patterns. Kvatch's destruction required massive rebuilding efforts beyond local capacity, necessitating imperial assistance that increased central government influence in region traditionally proud of its independence. Simultaneously, disruptions to inland trade routes temporarily increased importance of maritime shipping, enhancing Anvil's economic significance and political influence. These countervailing forces created complex regional dynamics as the Third Era gave way to Fourth, with traditional cultural patterns adapting to new economic and political realities within framework of enduring Colovian identity. For travelers along the Gold Coast during any era, certain experiences remain constant, despite historical changes. The play of light on water as sun sets over the Abyssinian Sea, transforming ordinary landscapes into the golden vistas that give the region its name. The distinctive tang of salt air mixing with scents of local cuisine in Anvil's harbor district, the sweeping views from Kvatch's plateau, where even after destruction and partial rebuilding, the relationship between human settlement and natural environment remains visibly encoded in landscape itself. These sensory experiences connect modern visitors to countless generations who lived, worked, and built communities along this fertile strip between mountains and sea, a continuity that transcends even cataclysmic events like the Oblivion Crisis in region whose identity remains fundamentally shaped by its distinctive geography and the human adaptations it has inspired across centuries. Chapter 3: The West Weald. Southeast from the Gold Coast, where the highlands of the Colovian estates give way to gentler terrain, lies the West Weald, a region of rolling hills, scattered woodlands, and fertile valleys, whose distinctive combination of climate and soil has created perhaps the most agriculturally productive landscape in all of Cyrodiil. This bountiful territory extends from the foothills of the Colovian highlands eastward to the fringes of the Great Forest, and from the southern reaches of the Imperial Reserve down to the border with Valenwood, a substantial expanse whose management falls primarily under the jurisdiction of County Skingrad. Unlike regions defined primarily by dramatic geographic features or dominated by singular urban centers, the West Weald represents perfect balance between natural endowment and human cultivation, a landscape shaped through centuries of careful agricultural development that enhances rather than obliterates the original character of the land. The result is neither wilderness nor entirely domesticated space, but harmonious integration where human activity exists in productive conversation with natural systems and cycles. At the heart of the West Weald stands Skingrad, a city whose distinctive architecture and culture reflect the unique character of the surrounding region. Unlike the coastal orientation of Anvil or the hilltop fortress design of Kvatch, Skingrad sprawls across uneven terrain that required creative architectural solutions, resulting in a city built on multiple levels connected by stone bridges spanning a central ravine. This unusual layout creates dramatic visual perspectives as travelers move through the city, with certain vantage points offering views across multiple layers of urban development simultaneously. Skingrad's buildings typically feature sturdy stone construction with steep pitched roofs designed to shed the occasional heavy snowfall that reaches this far south during particularly harsh winters. Distinctive enclosed walkways connect upper-story sections of adjacent buildings in many neighborhoods, allowing movement through portions of the city without descending to street level, a feature particularly appreciated during inclement weather. The overall effect creates urban environment that feels simultaneously solid and dynamic, with vertical elements as important as horizontal relationships in defining the city's character and daily patterns of movement. The city's governance, during the late Third Era, resided with Count Janis Hasseldor, a ruler whose exceptional longevity and reclusive habits generated considerable speculation among those unaware of his carefully guarded secret. The Count's vampiric condition, known only to a handful of trusted individuals, required elaborate arrangements to maintain both his physical needs and the appearance of normal human leadership. Despite these complications, historical records indicate Hasseldor maintained effective administration focused on practical improvements rather than personal glory, with particular emphasis on maintaining the agricultural prosperity that formed the foundation of Skingrad's economic strength. This prosperity derived primarily from the region's remarkable viticultural success, the vineyards surrounding Skingrad producing wines widely acknowledged as the finest in Tamriel. The combination of well-drained hillside soils, moderate rainfall patterns, and temperature fluctuations ideal for slow grape ripening created perfect conditions for viticulture, while centuries of experimentation by generations of vintners developed grape varieties specifically adapted to local conditions. The resulting wines, particularly the Cyrodiil brothers and Tamaka brands that achieved empire-wide recognition, became Skingrad's most famous export and major contributor to the county's exceptional wealth relative to its population size. Beyond wine production, the West Weald supported diverse agricultural activities, including grain cultivation in flatter valley bottoms, orchards on hillsides less suited to vineyards, and pastoral activities utilizing land too steep or rocky for cultivation. This agricultural diversity provided economic resilience during periods when particular crops faced challenges from weather, pests, or market fluctuations. Even in years when grape harvests disappointed, other agricultural sectors typically maintained sufficient productivity to prevent serious economic distress, a pattern that contributed to the region's reputation for stability and prosperity across generations. The natural landscape underlying this agricultural development features distinctive elements that influenced both settlement patterns and cultural development throughout the West Weald. Most notable are the scattered groves of large distinctive trees, known locally as great oaks, though botanically related to neither oak nor any other common Tamrielic tree species. These massive trees, some estimated at over 1,000 years old, with trunks wide enough to require multiple adults, linking arms to encircle, typically stand alone or in small groups, rather than forming proper forests, creating distinctive landmarks that often became focal points for community development and local identities. Many West Weald settlements incorporate these ancient trees into their physical and cultural structure. A village common built around a particularly massive specimen, local festivals celebrating the changing colors of their distinctive golden-hued autumn foliage, or traditional meeting places established beneath their expansive canopies. Some of the oldest trees bear names and histories extending back centuries, with local traditions attributing various mystical properties or historical significances to specific specimens, while imperial scholars generally dismiss the more fantastical elements of these beliefs. Ecological research confirms these trees indeed possess unusual properties, including remarkable disease resistance, extraordinary longevity, and apparent ability to influence surrounding plant communities in subtle but measurable ways. The wildlife of the West Weald similarly contributes to the region's distinctive character, with several species found nowhere else in Cyrodiil or indeed Tamriel. Most notable are the mountain lions known locally as Weald panthers, tawny-colored predators slightly smaller than their counterparts in more mountainous regions, but renowned for extraordinary stealth and intelligence. These solitary hunters rarely attack humans, but occasionally prey on livestock, creating complex relationship with farming communities that typically combines cautious respect with periodic conflict when particular animals develop problematic behavior patterns. More troublesome are the unique trolls indigenous to certain cave systems throughout the region. Unlike the larger trolls found in northern provinces, West Weald trolls stand only slightly taller than humans, but possess extraordinary speed and surprising intelligence that makes them significantly more dangerous than their size might suggest. Their preferred habitats center around specific limestone cave systems, where underground water sources create environmental conditions these creatures find ideal. Local settlements traditionally maintain specialized troll hunters who develop intimate knowledge of particular trolls' territories and behavior patterns, intervening when necessary to protect communities, while generally allowing the creatures to exist unmolested when they remain within their traditional ranges. The settlement pattern throughout the West Weald reflects careful balance between agricultural needs, defensive considerations, and social organization evolved over centuries of development. Larger villages typically occupy positions along natural travel routes or adjacent to particularly productive agricultural zones, with Skingrad itself developing at intersection point where east-west trade routes crossed north-south passage between the Gold Coast and Nibenay Valley. Smaller settlements often grew around specific resources, a particularly reliable spring, exceptionally fertile valley, or defensible position, offering protection during historical periods of greater instability. This organic development created cultural landscape where community identities often transcend strictly political boundaries, a particular valley's villages sharing distinctive dialect features and customs, regardless of which noble estate technically owns their lands, or adjacent communities maintaining generations-long friendly rivalries expressed through harvest festivals and sporting competitions. These local identities exist comfortably alongside broader identification with County Skingrad and the Empire itself, creating nested loyalties that accommodate both particular attachments to immediate surroundings and recognition of belonging to larger political entities. Religious practice throughout the West Weald demonstrates similar layering of imperial orthodoxy with local traditions and adaptations. The Chapel of Julianos in Skingrad represents official imperial cult at its most intellectually sophisticated, with the god of wisdom and logic receiving particular devotion in city renowned for viticultural science and agricultural innovation. Yet alongside this formal worship, vineyard communities maintain harvest rituals with elements clearly predating Alessian religious reforms, and rural settlements often preserve distinctive interpretations of the nine divines that emphasize aspects particularly relevant to agricultural concerns. Kinnereth's dominion over weather patterns receiving special attention in region where unseasonable frost or hail can destroy an entire year's crop in single night. The West Weald's relationship with the broader empire historically balanced significant economic contribution against relative administrative independence. The region's agricultural productivity, particularly its renowned wines that graced even the emperor's table, ensured imperial interest in maintaining favorable conditions for continued prosperity. Simultaneously, effective local governance under figures like Count Hasseldor demonstrated capacity for handling regional matters without extensive central government involvement, allowing mutually beneficial arrangement where imperial authority remained relatively light in exchange for reliable tax revenue and agricultural production. During the Oblivion Crisis, the West Weald experienced significant but uneven impact from Daedric incursions. Unlike Farcha's catastrophic destruction, no major West Weald settlement faced complete annihilation, though several smaller communities suffered substantial damage from isolated Oblivion gates that opened in rural areas. Count Hasseldor's leadership during this period received generally positive historical assessment, with his centuries of experience and supernatural capabilities proving unexpectedly valuable in crisis that transcended conventional administrative challenges. The Count's ability to operate effectively at night, when most human leaders required rest, provided crucial advantage in maintaining continuous response to unpredictable Daedric activity, while his enhanced physical capabilities allowed personal intervention in situations that would have proved fatal to ordinary humans. The post-crisis period brought both challenges and opportunities to the West Weald, with agricultural recovery proceeding relatively quickly compared to regions that suffered more extensive physical destruction. The disruption of normal trade patterns temporarily reduced market access for luxury goods like fine wines, creating economic pressure on specialty producers, while simultaneously increasing demand for staple crops needed to feed populations displaced from more severely affected regions. This transition required significant adjustment, but generally played to the West Weald's fundamental strengths: agricultural diversity and productive capacity that could shift emphasis between crops according to changing market conditions. For travelers exploring the West Weald today, certain experiences remain quintessential to understanding the region's unique character. The view from Castle Skingrad's upper terraces across the patchwork landscape of vineyards and orchards stretching toward distant hills offers perfect visual encapsulation of the harmonious relationship between human cultivation and natural landscape that defines the region. The distinctive microclimate variations become apparent even during single day's journey, with morning mist clinging to valley bottoms while hillsides bask in clear sunlight, creating environmental diversity that directly translates to agricultural specialization and cultural variation within relatively small geographic areas. The taste of West Weald wines, particularly those from established vineyards with centuries of continuous production, provides sensory connection to the region's fundamental character that transcends visual or intellectual appreciation. These wines, with their complex flavor profiles, reflecting specific soil compositions, microclimates, and traditional production methods, represent perfect distillation of landscape into experience. The West Weald's distinctive terroir, captured in form that allows direct sensory appreciation of what makes this region unlike any other in Tamriel. Most profound, perhaps, is the sense of historical continuity evident throughout the region, the awareness that current agricultural patterns reflect centuries of accumulated knowledge passed through generations of farmers who observed, experimented, and adapted their practices to this specific landscape. The West Weald embodies agricultural civilization at its most successful and sustainable human activity, that enhances rather than depletes the natural environments it utilizes, creating relationship that could theoretically continue indefinitely rather than exhausting the resources upon which it depends. This sustainability represents the West Weald's most significant, though often overlooked contribution to imperial civilization, demonstration that human development need not conflict with environmental health when approached through generations of careful observation and adaptation rather than short-term exploitation. In region where some vineyard operations can trace continuous family management back 15 generations or more, the concept of stewardship, responsibility to maintain land for future generations rather than maximizing immediate production, shapes agricultural practice in ways that more recently developed regions might beneficially emulate. As we leave the golden vineyards and ancient trees of the West Weald behind, carrying with us appreciation for perfect balance between natural bounty and human cultivation that defines this region, we turn our attention northward to the expansive woodlands of the Great Forest, a different but equally distinctive environment whose character has shaped another facet of Cyrodiil's diverse provincial identity. Chapter 4: The Great Forest. North of the West Weald and the Imperial Reserve, stretching from the foothills of the Colovian Highlands eastward toward the Nibenay Valley, stands the Great Forest, the largest continuous woodland in Cyrodiil, and perhaps the most extensive temperate forest remaining in all of Tamriel. This vast expanse of trees creates a world apart from the cultivated landscapes and urban centers that dominate other regions of the province, a place where human presence remains light across substantial territories, where ancient natural processes continue largely uninterrupted by imperial ambitions or agricultural development. Unlike the carefully managed woodlands found in more densely settled regions, the Great Forest represents true old-growth ecosystem, many of its trees predating not just the current empire, but human civilization itself in Cyrodiil. Massive oaks, towering cedars, and ancient beech trees create multi-layered canopy that in many areas permits only dappled sunlight to reach the forest floor, creating distinctive undergrowth communities adapted to low-light conditions. Seasonal changes transform this environment dramatically. Spring carpets of wildflowers giving way to lush summer greenery, followed by spectacular autumn color displays before winter's bare branches reveal architectural complexity normally hidden by foliage. Coral's architecture reflects its forest edge position and the availability of excellent timber from surrounding woodlands, while major structures like the castle, chapel, and city walls utilize stone construction for defensive purposes. Most buildings combine stone foundations with substantial timber framing and wooden architectural elements. Distinctive carved decorations, particularly the stylized oak leaf motifs found throughout the city, showcase the exceptional woodworking tradition that represents one of Coral's most notable cultural contributions to imperial civilization. On the western edge of this great woodland stands the city of Coral, county seat and primary urban center, serving the northwestern quadrant of Cyrodiil. Unlike the geometric precision of the Imperial City or the dramatic vertical elements of Skingrad, Coral presents more organic layout that reflects its evolution from hunting camp to market, town to county capital over many centuries. The city walls form rough oval, enclosing central districts focused around Castle Coral and the Great Oak, massive tree predating human settlement, whose enormous canopy shades the city's main plaza and serves as both practical gathering place and symbolic heart of community identity. The forest extent has diminished somewhat since the First Era, with agricultural clearing and settlement reducing its southern and eastern boundaries over centuries. Yet its core remains remarkably intact due to combination of imperial conservation policies, challenging terrain that discourage development, and cultural reverence for ancient woodlands embedded in both Colovian and Nibenay traditions. The result is wilderness substantial enough to harbor wildlife requiring extensive territories and ecological processes dependent on minimal human disturbance, a reservoir of biodiversity increasingly rare in more developed regions of the continent. The ecology of the Great Forest deserves particular attention, both for its intrinsic significance and for its influence on human communities throughout the region. Unlike the relatively simple forest ecosystems found in northern provinces, where harsh conditions limit biological diversity, the temperate climate of central Cyrodiil supports remarkable variety of plant and animal species interacting through complex ecological relationships. This biodiversity manifests across multiple scales, from towering canopy trees to specialized fungi decomposing fallen wood, from apex predators like bears and mountain lions to countless invertebrate species performing essential but often invisible ecological functions. Beyond the city walls, Jerall County encompasses substantial territory, including significant portions of the Great Forest itself and the eastern foothills of the Colovian Highlands. Smaller settlements dot this landscape, typically positioned either along major roads where security and commerce provide sustainable economic base, or around specific resources valuable enough to justify the challenges of forest living. These communities maintain diverse relationships with the woodland environment, some primarily extracting resources through carefully managed forestry or hunting, others functioning as trading posts connecting forest products with broader markets, and a few deliberately cultivating harmonious integration with natural systems through lifestyles that minimize environmental disruption. The city's governance during the late Third Era rested with Countess Ariana Valga, who assumed leadership following her husband's death and ruled with reputation for practical competence and attention to ordinary citizens' concerns. Her administration maintained particularly strong relationship with the Fighters Guild, whose Coral Chapter House served as coordinating center for managing the various threats, from mundane banditry to dangerous wildlife, that forest environments inevitably generate in proximity to human settlement. This partnership exemplified Coral's pragmatic approach to governance, focusing on tangible security and economic concerns, rather than the elaborate political maneuvering more characteristic of eastern counties. More dangerous to human interests are the indigenous bear populations, particularly the black bears, whose intelligence, strength, and occasional predatory behavior create significant management challenges in areas where human settlement edges against forest habitat. Unlike northern bears that hibernate through winter months, great forest bears maintain activity through most of the year due to milder climate and food availability, creating year-round potential for human-wildlife conflict. Local traditions throughout forest edge communities include elaborate protocols for avoiding bear encounters and specialized knowledge for distinguishing between individuals likely to flee human contact versus those exhibiting more aggressive tendencies requiring intervention. The forest trolls represent another significant threat to human activities within the woodland, though their behavior patterns and habitat preferences make encounters somewhat less common than with bears. These territorial creatures typically establish domains centered around cave systems or particularly dense forest sections, marking boundaries through distinctive scarring of trees and other environmental modifications recognizable to knowledgeable woods people. Unlike the more aggressive troll species found in northern provinces, Forest trolls generally avoid human contact when possible, attacking primarily when their territories face direct intrusion. This behavior pattern has allowed development of avoidance strategies that significantly reduce conflict when properly implemented by those traveling through troll territories. Perhaps most ecologically significant are the forest's deer populations, particularly the native Colovian white deer, whose annual migrations between summer and winter ranges have shaped both forest ecology and human hunting traditions for centuries. These graceful herbivores influence vegetation patterns through selective browsing, create trails utilized by numerous other species, including humans, and provide primary prey base, supporting predator populations throughout the region. Their management represents one of the more successful examples of imperial conservation policy, with regulated hunting systems developed over generations, maintaining balance between human utilization and population sustainability, despite substantial economic value attached to both meat and hides. Chapter 4: The Great Forest. North of the West Weald and the Imperial Reserve, stretching from the foothills of the Colovian Highlands eastward toward the Nibenay Valley, stands the Great Forest, the largest continuous woodland in Cyrodiil, and perhaps the most extensive temperate forest remaining in all of Tamriel. This vast expanse of trees creates a world apart from the cultivated landscapes and urban centers that dominate other regions of the province, a place where human presence remains light across substantial territories, where ancient natural processes continue largely uninterrupted by imperial ambitions or agricultural development. Unlike the carefully managed woodlands found in more densely settled regions, the Great Forest represents true old-growth ecosystem, many of its trees predating not just the current empire, but human civilization itself in Cyrodiil. Massive oaks, towering cedars, and ancient beech trees create multi-layered canopy that in many areas permits only dappled sunlight to reach the forest floor, creating distinctive undergrowth communities adapted to low-light conditions. Seasonal changes transform this environment dramatically. Spring carpets of wildflowers giving way to lush summer greenery, followed by spectacular autumn color displays before winter's bare branches reveal architectural complexity normally hidden by foliage. The forest extent has diminished somewhat since the First Era, with agricultural clearing and settlement reducing its southern and eastern boundaries over centuries. Yet its core remains remarkably intact due to combination of imperial conservation policies, challenging terrain that discouraged development, and cultural reverence for ancient woodlands embedded in both Colovian and Nibenay traditions. The result is wilderness substantial enough to harbor wildlife requiring extensive territories and ecological processes dependent on minimal human disturbance, a reservoir of biodiversity increasingly rare in more developed regions of the continent. The western edge of this great woodland stands the city of Cheydinhal, county seat and primary urban center, serving the northwestern quadrant of Cyrodiil. Unlike the geometric precision of the Imperial City or the dramatic vertical elements of Skingrad, Cheydinhal presents more organic layout that reflects its evolution from hunting camp to market, town to county capital over many centuries. The city walls form rough oval, enclosing central districts focused around Castle Cheydinhal and the Great Oak, massive tree predating human settlement, whose enormous canopy shades the city's main plaza and serves as both practical gathering place and symbolic heart of community identity. Cheydinhal's architecture reflects its forest edge position and the availability of excellent timber from surrounding woodlands, while major structures like the castle, chapel, and city walls utilize stone construction for defensive purposes. Most buildings combine stone foundations with substantial timber framing and wooden architectural elements. Distinctive carved decorations, particularly the stylized oak leaf motifs found throughout the city, showcase the exceptional woodworking tradition that represents one of Coral's most notable cultural contributions to imperial civilization. The city's governance during the late Third Era rested with Countess Ariana Valga, who assumed leadership following her husband's death and ruled with reputation for practical competence and attention to ordinary citizens' concerns. Her administration maintained particularly strong relationship with the Fighters Guild, whose Coral Chapter House served as coordinating center for managing the various threats, from mundane banditry to dangerous wildlife, that forest environments inevitably generate in proximity to human settlement. This partnership exemplified Coral's pragmatic approach to governance, focusing on tangible security and economic concerns, rather than the elaborate political maneuvering more characteristic of eastern counties. Beyond the city walls, Jerall County encompasses substantial territory, including significant portions of the Great Forest itself and the eastern foothills of the Colovian Highlands. Smaller settlements dot this landscape, typically positioned either along major roads where security and commerce provide sustainable economic base, or around specific resources valuable enough to justify the challenges of forest living. These communities maintain diverse relationships with the woodland environment, some primarily extracting resources through carefully managed forestry or hunting, others functioning as trading posts connecting forest products with broader markets, and a few deliberately cultivating harmonious integration with natural systems through lifestyles that minimize environmental disruption. The ecology of the Great Forest deserves particular attention, both for its intrinsic significance and for its influence on human communities throughout the region. Unlike the relatively simple forest ecosystems found in northern provinces, where harsh conditions limit biological diversity, the temperate climate of central Cyrodiil supports remarkable variety of plant and animal species interacting through complex ecological relationships. This biodiversity manifests across multiple scales, from towering canopy trees to specialized fungi decomposing fallen wood, from apex predators like bears and mountain lions to countless invertebrate species performing essential but often invisible ecological functions. Perhaps most ecologically significant are the forest's deer populations, particularly the native Colovian white deer, whose annual migrations between summer and winter ranges have shaped both forest ecology and human hunting traditions for centuries. These graceful herbivores influence vegetation patterns through selective browsing, create trails utilized by numerous other species, including humans, and provide primary prey base, supporting predator populations throughout the region. Their management represents one of the more successful examples of imperial conservation policy, with regulated hunting systems developed over generations, maintaining balance between human utilization and population sustainability, despite substantial economic value attached to both meat and hides. More dangerous to human interests are the indigenous bear populations, particularly the black bears, whose intelligence, strength, and occasional predatory behavior create significant management challenges in areas where human settlement edges against forest habitat. Unlike northern bears that hibernate through winter months, great forest bears maintain activity through most of the year due to milder climate and food availability, creating year-round potential for human-wildlife conflict. Local traditions throughout forest edge communities include elaborate protocols for avoiding bear encounters and specialized knowledge for distinguishing between individuals likely to flee human contact versus those exhibiting more aggressive tendencies requiring intervention. The forest trolls represent another significant threat to human activities within the woodland, though their behavior patterns and habitat preferences make encounters somewhat less common than with bears. These territorial creatures typically establish domains centered around cave systems or particularly dense forest sections, marking boundaries through distinctive scarring of trees and other environmental modifications recognizable to knowledgeable woods people. Unlike the more aggressive troll species found in northern provinces, forest trolls generally avoid human contact when possible, attacking primarily when their territories face direct intrusion. This behavior pattern has allowed development of avoidance strategies that significantly reduce conflict when properly implemented by those traveling through troll territories. Beyond these larger, more visible species, exists complex ecological community, including countless plants, fungi, insects, and smaller vertebrates, whose interactions create the forest's fundamental character and resilience. Particular mention should be made of the forest's remarkable fungal diversity, with mycological surveys identifying over 300 distinct species, ranging from tiny cup fungi to massive shelf formations growing on fallen trees. Many of these possess significant alchemical properties, creating economic incentive for systematic harvesting that supports specialized collectors throughout forest communities, while requiring careful management to prevent unsustainable exploitation of slower-growing species. Human interaction with the Great Forest has evolved considerably since the First Era, when early settlers viewed the woodland primarily as obstacle to agricultural development and source of building materials. The initial pattern of aggressive clearing gave way gradually to more selective and sustainable approaches as experience demonstrated both practical value of forest resources and ecological consequences of excessive removal. By the Third Era, sophisticated management systems balanced resource extraction with conservation concerns, creating a mosaic of intensively utilized areas, carefully managed zones, and protected regions where human impact remained deliberately minimized. This evolution reflects growing understanding of forest environments, complexity, and the practical benefits of maintaining healthy woodland ecosystems adjacent to human settlements. Beyond obvious resources like timber and game animals, intact forest provides numerous services essential to regional well-being, stabilizing watersheds that supply clean water to downstream communities, moderating local climate patterns that affect agricultural productivity, and maintaining biodiversity that supports everything from pollination services to medicinal plant supplies. Recognition of these benefits gradually transformed imperial policy from viewing forest primarily as resource repository to understanding it as essential infrastructure requiring deliberate protection and management. The religious significance of the Great Forest adds another dimension to its regional importance, with several prominent sacred sites located within its boundaries. Most notable is the Great Chapel of Stendar in Cheydinhal, whose theological emphasis on compassion and righteous mercy seems particularly appropriate for community positioned at interface between civilization and wilderness, a location where both justice and mercy remain necessary components of sustainable relationship with challenging natural environments. The chapel's architectural harmony with surrounding forest elements, particularly its distinctive stained glass windows depicting woodland scenes illuminated by natural light filtered through actual trees outside, represents perfect integration of spiritual and environmental elements characteristic of the region's distinctive cultural identity. Beyond formal religious structures, the forest contains numerous locations traditionally associated with supernatural or mystical significance. Certain ancient trees unusually shaped rock formations, caves with distinctive acoustic properties, and other natural features became focal points for local spiritual practices that often predate organized imperial religion, but continue alongside more orthodox observances. These traditions typically emphasize direct communion with natural forces rather than elaborate theological systems, creating religious expression particularly suited to forest environment, where immediate experience of natural power often proves more compelling than abstract doctrines. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Great Forest faced unique challenges stemming from its extensive wilderness areas with minimal human presence. Unlike more densely populated regions where Daedric incursions met immediate detection and response, Oblivion gates, opening deep within the forest, sometimes remained undiscovered for significant periods, allowing Daedric forces to establish substantial presence before organized opposition could develop. Several smaller settlements suffered complete destruction before broader awareness of specific threats emerged, and certain forest sections became effectively ceded to Daedric control for portions of the crisis, requiring substantial effort to reclaim even after Martin Septim's sacrifice closed the gates themselves. Conversely, the forest provided valuable refuge for those fleeing Daedric attacks on more exposed communities, with numerous accounts describing survival groups hiding successfully within woodland environments that offered both concealment from Daedric patrols and sustainable resources for those possessing appropriate knowledge and skills. Traditional forest craft, the ability to move silently, establish hidden camps, locate wild food sources, and navigate without obvious trails, proved unexpectedly valuable during period when conventional security systems failed. This experience reinforced cultural value attached to woodland skills that might otherwise have diminished with increasing urbanization and technological development. The post-crisis period brought both recovery efforts and re-evaluation of human-forest relationships throughout the region. Areas severely damaged by Daedric activity, particularly zones around gate locations where environmental corruption extended beyond mere physical destruction, required specialized restoration approaches combining magical cleansing with careful ecological rehabilitation. Some heavily impacted sections were deliberately left untouched as study sites and memorials, creating locations where the lingering consequences of extraplanar intrusion could be monitored and remembered as cautionary examples of cosmic forces beyond normal mortal experience. For travelers exploring the Great Forest today, the experience differs fundamentally from journeys through more developed regions of Cyrodiil. The most obvious distinction comes through sensory immersion, the distinctive forest soundscape combining wind through canopy, bird and insect calls that change with time and season, and the particular quality of sound in space where trees absorb and redirect acoustic energy. The visual environment similarly transforms perception, with sightlines typically limited to dozens rather than hundreds of yards, creating intimate experiencing of immediate surroundings rather than the expansive vistas characteristic of open landscapes. The forest's massive scale becomes apparent only gradually, as journeys that appear brief on maps extend into day-long expeditions due to terrain challenges, necessary detours around impassable features, and the deceptive distances between recognizable landmarks in seemingly uniform woodland. Even well-maintained roads through the forest create distinctive traveling experience, with limited sightlines requiring constant readiness for unexpected encounters, and the psychological effect of moving through tunnel-like environment where civilized spaces appear only occasionally as welcome breaks in the continuous woodland canopy. Perhaps most significant for understanding the Great Forest's essential character is recognizing the temporal dimension unique to ancient woodland environments, the awareness of moving through landscape where significant elements have existed for centuries or millennia, creating connection to timescales that transcend human lifespans and even civilizational periods. The massive trees that require 5 adults linking hands to encircle have stood watching the rise and fall of multiple imperial dynasties, the comings and goings of countless individual humans whose lives register as mere moments against the slow growth of beings, measuring time in centuries rather than years or decades. This temporal perspective, simultaneously humbling and reassuring, represents the Great Forest's most profound contribution to Cyrodiil's provincial identity. In region where ancient living beings create visible connection to time periods predating not just current political arrangements, but human civilization itself, certain fundamental truths become inescapable: the transience of political structures, the continuity of natural processes despite human disruptions, and the possibility of sustainable relationships between human communities and environments that transcend individual lifespans through traditions of stewardship and respect passed between generations. As we continue our journey through Cyrodiil's diverse landscapes, carrying with us appreciation for the ancient rhythms and deep time perspective embodied in the Great Forest's towering trees and complex ecological communities, we turn our attention northward to the snow-capped peaks and hardy residents of the Jerall Mountains, a dramatically different environment that has shaped yet another distinctive facet of the province's multifaceted identity. Chapter 5: The Jerall Mountains. Along Cyrodiil's northern border, forming the natural boundary between the Imperial Province and Skyrim, rise the Jerall Mountains, a towering range of jagged peaks, deep valleys, and alpine plateaus whose harsh conditions and dramatic landscapes have shaped both the natural environment and human communities that call this challenging region home. Unlike the temperate woodlands of the Great Forest or the fertile fields of the West Weald, the Jeralls present environment of extremes, towering heights, and precipitous drops, winter temperatures that can freeze exposed flesh within minutes, summer storms that appear with minimal warning, and devastating intensity. The mountains themselves predate human civilization by countless millennia, formed through massive geological uplifting when ancient continental plates collided with force almost beyond comprehension. The subsequent eons of erosion, wind, water, and ice slowly carving the stone, created the distinctive features visible today. Knife-edge ridges separating parallel valleys, cirques where ancient glaciers carved bowl-shaped depressions into mountainsides, and numerous caves where water dissolved more vulnerable rock layers to create underground systems whose extent remains incompletely mapped despite centuries of exploration. The Jerall's position, connecting two provinces with distinct cultures, has made the range historically significant as both barrier and passage point. While the mountains generally impede easy movement between Cyrodiil and Skyrim, certain passes have facilitated trade, migration, and occasionally military movements between these regions since earliest recorded history. The most significant of these passages, the Pale Pass, gained particular importance during various conflicts between Nord and Imperial forces, and retains considerable strategic value even during periods of peaceful relations between these provinces. This architectural character reflects Bruma's demographic reality as the most heavily Nord-influenced city within Cyrodiil's borders. While officially and legally an imperial county, the city's population includes substantial minority of residents with direct Skyrim heritage, creating cultural environment that blends Nordic traditions with imperial governance and Colovian pragmatism. This mixture appears throughout daily life, mead halls operating alongside imperial-style taverns, Nordic religious practices continuing within framework of chapel worship, traditional Nord naming patterns persisting alongside imperial conventions among established families. At the southern foot of the range stands Bruma, Cyrodiil's northernmost city, and the primary urban center serving the Jerall region. Unlike the distinctively Colovian architecture of Coral or the imperial styles dominant in the Nibenay basin, Bruma's buildings show unmistakable Nordic influence, steeply pitched roofs designed to shed heavy snow, compact layouts that minimize exposure to harsh winter winds, and decorative elements reminiscent of traditional Nord craftsmanship rather than the more ornate imperial aesthetic found in southern cities. Beyond Bruma itself, human settlement throughout the Jeralls remains sparse and primarily concentrated in valleys and lower elevations where climate permits sustainable agriculture. Small villages typically center around specific resources or economic activities, mining communities developing where valuable mineral deposits justify the difficulties of mountain industry, logging camps utilizing the coniferous forests of middle elevations, and trading posts positioned at strategic points along the limited road network, connecting these isolated settlements with broader imperial markets. The city's governance during the late Third Era rested with Countess Narina Kavan, a ruler noted both for scholarly interest in ancient Nord artifacts and for practical administrative competence in managing city whose challenging environment demands efficient leadership. Historical accounts describe Kavan balancing respect for Bruma's distinctive cultural character with firm maintenance of imperial authority, creating governance model that accommodated local traditions without compromising fundamental allegiance to the empire. This balance became particularly significant during the Oblivion crisis, when Bruma's position as northernmost defensible city made it crucial strategic location during later stages of the conflict. These communities developed distinctive characteristics, shaped by their specific locations and challenges. Higher elevation villages might remain snowbound for 6 months yearly, creating social patterns and economic strategies organized entirely around this seasonal reality. Valley settlements often face recurring challenges from spring flooding when mountain snowmelt overwhelms normal waterways, and all mountain communities maintain constant awareness of avalanche danger during winter months and rockslide risks following heavy rains, natural hazards requiring both practical preparedness and psychological adaptations to maintain functional society in an environment where disaster may arrive with minimal warning. The ecology of the Jerall Mountains reflects the biological responses to vertical zonation, the dramatic changes in temperature, precipitation, and growing season that occur as elevation increases. The foothills and lower slopes support mixed forests dominated by hardy pine and fir species, transitioning to increasingly stunted and specialized vegetation as altitude increases. Above approximately 8,000 feet, true alpine conditions prevail, with tree line giving way to hardy shrubs, specialized grasses, and remarkable flowering plants adapted to extreme conditions and abbreviated growing seasons. Most iconic among Jerall wildlife are the mountain trolls, particularly dangerous subspecies adapted to high altitude conditions and possessing both greater strength and more aggressive territorial behavior than their lowland counterparts. These creatures typically establish domains centered around cave systems, offering protection from harsh weather, emerging to hunt across surprisingly extensive territories when conditions permit. Their remarkable cold tolerance allows activity during winter periods when most potential prey species have migrated to lower elevations, creating particular danger for human travelers who may encounter trolls as the only large predators active during the harshest months. Wildlife similarly demonstrates specialization across these elevational gradients. Lower regions support diverse ecosystem, including deer, wolves, foxes, and various smaller mammals, fundamentally similar to those found in northern sections of the Great Forest. Middle elevations host more specialized species, including mountain goats, whose remarkable climbing abilities allow utilization of terrain inaccessible to most predators, and snow foxes, whose seasonal coat changes provide camouflage in both snowy and non-snowy conditions. The highest zones, despite appearing relatively barren, support surprising biodiversity among specialized creatures, particularly the remarkable alpine insects, whose antifreeze-like body chemistry allows survival through winter conditions that would kill most organisms. This seasonal reality fundamentally shapes human relationship with the Jerall environment. The awareness that mountains in summer and mountains in winter represent essentially different worlds, requiring entirely different approaches to travel, resource acquisition, and basic survival. The annual cycle drives nearly every aspect of traditional mountain life, with summer months devoted to intensive activity, crops planted, harvested, and preserved within the brief growing season, building projects completed during the construction-friendly weather, necessary travel conducted while passes remain open, and resources stockpiled against the inevitable return of conditions that will require indoor focus and careful management of accumulated supplies. These seasonal imperatives create distinctive cultural patterns throughout Jerall communities. The traditional harvest to hearth celebration, marking official transition from outdoor to indoor focus, typically occurs with first significant snowfall, initiating period where community bonds strengthen through shared indoor activities, storytelling sessions, preserving local history and practical knowledge, collaborative craft projects utilizing stored materials, and regular communal meals that both consolidate social connections and efficiently utilize preserved foods through shared preparation and consumption. The spring counterpart, icebreak festivals celebrating winter's end and resumption of normal travel and outdoor activities, typically feature more raucous celebration, understandable psychological release after months of confined living and careful resource management. These celebrations traditionally include competitive games, testing physical skills maintained through winter training, symbolic destruction of objects representing winter's hardships, and ritual meal sharing, first spring greens, and preserved meats in combinations representing transition between seasons. Religious practice throughout the Jeralls demonstrates particularly interesting synthesis between official imperial cult worship and older traditions with direct Nordic roots. The Chapel of Talos in Bruma represents the most visible manifestation of official religion, with particular emphasis on aspects of Talos Tiber Septim associated with physical endurance, righteous struggle against overwhelming odds, and northern cultural heritage. Yet alongside this imperial-sanctioned worship, many communities maintain traditions honoring aspects of Nordic pantheon, either through direct continuation of ancient practices or through syncretistic integration, where Nordic deities are acknowledged as alternative aspects or interpretations of the nine divines. The practical challenges of mountain life ensure that regardless of specific theological details, religious practice throughout the Jeralls maintains pragmatic focus on forces directly relevant to daily existence, prayers for protection against storms and avalanches, rituals marking seasonal transitions crucial to survival planning, and Thanksgiving observances when communities successfully navigate another winter without significant loss. This practical spirituality transcends specific doctrinal differences, creating common ground between residents with different cultural backgrounds, but shared experience of mountain environmental realities. Perhaps most distinctive among Jerall cultural elements are the winter sagas, extensive oral narratives, traditionally performed during the longest nights when outdoor activity becomes impossible and entertainment necessarily turns inward. These complex stories, often requiring multiple nights for complete performance, combine historical accounts, practical mountain survival knowledge, moral instruction, and pure entertainment in formats designed to engage audiences across multiple age groups simultaneously. Master storytellers capable of performing the most complex sagas from memory gain significant status within mountain communities, their performances serving both entertainment and crucial cultural transmission functions. Bruma itself became focal point for critical events during the later stages of the crisis, when the mythic Dawn targeted the city as part of their strategy to block potential reinforcement from Skyrim and eliminate the last defensible position protecting the northern approach to the Imperial City. The legendary Battle of Bruma, where forces gathered from across Cyrodiil under Martin Septim's leadership defeated a major Daedric assault centered around a great gate, represents perhaps the most significant conventional military engagement of the entire crisis, demonstrating that coordinated mortal resistance could effectively counter Daedric invasion tactics under appropriate leadership and circumstances. During the Oblivion crisis, the Jerall region faced distinctive challenges stemming from both its harsh environment and strategic position. The mountain's difficult terrain and limited road network complicated defensive coordination, allowing Daedric forces to establish footholds in isolated areas that proved difficult to detect and eliminate. Conversely, these same factors made coordinated Daedric activities equally challenging, preventing the kind of massive, organized assaults that devastated more accessible regions like Kvatch. The post-crisis period brought significant challenges to Jerall communities already operating with minimal resource margins due to their challenging environment. The disruption of normal trade patterns temporarily isolated mountain settlements dependent on imported supplies to supplement local production, requiring extraordinary adaptations to prevent hardship during the difficult reconstruction period. Yet these same communities demonstrated remarkable resilience precisely because their traditional lifeways had always incorporated preparation for potential isolation. The stored supplies, practical skills, and social cooperation systems normally maintained against winter emergencies proved equally valuable during the broader provincial disruptions following the crisis. The sensory aspects of Jerall life leave particularly vivid impressions. The distinctive quality of air at higher elevations, simultaneously thinner, yet somehow more intensely scented with pine and mineral notes. The remarkable acoustics of mountain environments, where sounds either carry across valleys with supernatural clarity or disappear into snowy landscapes with unnatural abruptness. The particular intensity of alpine sunlight reflecting off snow with brightness that requires eye protection to prevent painful snow blindness. These direct physical experiences connect visitors to the environmental realities that have shaped mountain cultures across generations, making immediately comprehensible why certain adaptations and traditions developed and persisted in these challenging conditions. For travelers exploring the Jerall region today, certain experiences remain essential to understanding its distinctive character. The view from Bruma's northern gate, looking across successive mountain ridges stretching toward the Skyrim border, offers visual encapsulation of the awesome scale that defines this landscape, a perspective where human construction appears appropriately humble against the massive geological canvas that both precedes and will outlast all civilization. The abrupt transitions between microclimate zones during even short journeys demonstrate environmental diversity compressed into vertical rather than horizontal space. Travelers gaining condensed ecological tour in single days upward journey that might require weeks of northward travel to experience through latitudinal change alone. Perhaps most profound is experiencing the Jerall's unique relationship with time, a landscape where geological processes, normally too gradual for human perception, occasionally manifest with startling immediacy through rock slides, avalanches, or intense erosion during flash floods. This juxtaposition between the mountains' apparent permanence and their capacity for sudden, dramatic change creates cognitive framework that shapes philosophical perspectives throughout mountain communities, worldview that simultaneously acknowledges both impressive durability of natural systems and their capacity for abrupt, catastrophic transformation, with human existence balanced carefully between these realities. As we descend from the harsh yet majestic heights of the Jerall Mountains, carrying with us appreciation for both the physical grandeur of this northern borderland and the remarkable human adaptations that have created sustainable communities in one of Cyrodiil's most challenging environments, we turn our attention eastward to the very different waterways and wetlands of the Nibenay Valley, a region whose abundant moisture and ancient cultural traditions have created another distinctive facet of the province's remarkably diverse character. Chapter 6: The Nibenay Valley. The region's fundamental geography reflects complex interplay between water and land over millennia. The Niben River itself, flowing northward from Topol Bay through the heart of Cyrodiil before joining Lake Remiri, has repeatedly changed course throughout geological history, leaving behind oxbow lakes, abandoned channels, and fertile floodplains that create the valley's distinctive mosaic landscape. Each spring, snowmelt from surrounding highlands temporarily expands the river's reach, depositing fresh sediments that maintain soil fertility while reshaping subtle elements of the terrain in continuous geological dialogue between water, earth, and the life forms dependent on both. In the eastern reaches of Cyrodiil, where the land descends from the Valus Mountains toward the province's central plains, lies the Nibenay Valley, a fertile basin defined by the Niben River and its countless tributaries, whose waters have nurtured both agricultural abundance and cultural flowering since the earliest days of human settlement in the region. Unlike the more rugged Colovian West or the harsh northern mountains, the Nibenay presents landscape where water dominates the environmental character, from the broad main channel of the Niben itself to the intricate network of smaller rivers, streams, and seasonal waterways that create one of Tamriel's most productive wetland ecosystems. Ravel's architecture reflects practical adaptations to wetland environments, buildings typically constructed on stone foundations to mitigate groundwater infiltration, upper stories often projecting beyond lower levels to maximize space while minimizing the footprint requiring stable foundation, and numerous small bridges spanning the canals and waterways that extend the river's reach into the city itself. This construction approach sacrifices monumental grandeur for practical functionality in challenging conditions, creating cityscape that visitors often initially perceive as shabby or haphazard, but which reveals sophisticated environmental adaptations upon closer examination. This environmental dynamism, the river simultaneously constant in its presence, yet ever-changing in its precise configuration, establish patterns that have influenced human settlement since the earliest recorded history. Unlike regions where stable geographical features encourage fixed, unchanging human habitations, the Nibenay Valley fostered more adaptable relationship between people and landscape. Settlements designed with awareness of seasonal flooding cycles, agricultural systems that incorporate rather than resist annual inundations, and cultural perspectives that recognize change as fundamental rather than exceptional aspect of existence. The most significant urban center within this fluid landscape is Bravil, a city whose distinctive character reflects both the opportunities and challenges of life in the lower Nibenay. Unlike the carefully planned Imperial City or the defensively positioned Bruma, Bravil developed through gradual, organic process of accretion along the western bank of the Niben, where slightly elevated ground provided minimal protection from seasonal flooding, while maintaining direct access to the river for transportation and fishing. The resulting city presents famously chaotic layout, with narrow winding streets following no obvious pattern, buildings constructed over and sometimes incorporating older structures, and neighborhood boundaries that shift subtly over generations as residents adapt to changing conditions, both environmental and social. Beyond Bravil itself, human settlement throughout the Nibenay Valley follows patterns dictated by the relationship between water and elevation. Villages and towns typically occupy slight rises or natural levees adjacent to waterways, positioning communities to maintain water access while minimizing flood risk. Agricultural development focuses on the fertile floodplains, where annual inundations renew soil nutrients, with crop selection and planting schedules carefully calibrated to local flood cycles. Fishing communities establish themselves along primary waterways, while specialized settlements focused on harvesting the valley's abundant wild resources, from medicinal plants to unique alchemical ingredients, often occupy transitional zones between distinct ecological communities. These settlements collectively create cultural landscape, distinct from other Cyrodiilic regions, a Nibenese identity characterized by greater flexibility, syncretism, and comfort with ambiguity than typically found in Colovian territories, where Western Cyrodiil generally emphasizes clarity, tradition, and straightforward approaches to challenges. Nibenese culture typically embraces complexity, adaptation, and indirect solutions that work with rather than against existing conditions and limitations. This philosophical distinction, often oversimplified as practical Colovians versus mystical Nibenese, reflects environmental differences between regions, where mastering relatively stable conditions proves effective strategy versus areas where adapting to inherently dynamic systems offers more sustainable approach. The city's governance during the late Third Era resided with Count Regulus Terentius, a ruler widely regarded as well-intentioned but ineffective in addressing Bravil's endemic problems with poverty, crime, and skooma addiction. Historical accounts suggest Terentius maintained physical security and basic administrative functions, while lacking either resources or vision necessary for more fundamental improvements to city conditions. This limited governance allowed Bravil to develop distinctive social character, where unofficial power structures, particularly criminal organizations and informal neighborhood associations, often exercised greater practical influence over daily life than official imperial authorities. Wildlife adapted to this semi-aquatic environment includes several species found nowhere else in Cyrodiil or indeed Tamriel. Most notable are the Nibenay turtles, massive reptiles whose shells can exceed 5 feet in diameter, among the oldest individuals, and whose annual mating gatherings along certain sandbars represent significant cultural events for riverine communities. Various waterbird species establish extensive breeding colonies throughout the valley's diverse wetlands, creating spectacular visual displays during migration seasons when thousands of individuals move through the region simultaneously. And beneath the water's surface, the extraordinary giant slaughterfish, technically common throughout Tamriel's waterways, but reaching truly remarkable size in the nutrient-rich Nibenay system, maintain position as apex predators whose occasional attacks on boats and swimmers generate cautionary tales repeated throughout riverside communities. The ecology of the Nibenay Valley ranks among Tamriel's most diverse and productive wetland systems, supporting tremendous biodiversity across multiple interconnected habitat types. The main river channel and larger tributaries host numerous fish species ranging from massive river sturgeon to the small, colorful perch varieties that feature prominently in local cuisine. Seasonal floodplains transform from productive agricultural land during drier months to vital spawning grounds for fish and amphibians during inundation periods. Permanent wetlands support extraordinary plant diversity, from towering river willow trees to specialized floating vegetation that creates distinctive mats capable of supporting substantial weight despite their apparently fragile nature. Less immediately visible, but equally significant for understanding the valley's ecological character, are the countless invertebrate species that maintain water quality through filtering activities, break down organic materials to release nutrients back into the system, and provide essential food sources for larger creatures, including humans. From the distinctive blue river clams, whose shells feature prominently in traditional Nibenay decorative arts, to the remarkable diversity of insect life that emerges in spectacular hatches during summer months. These smaller organisms collectively perform functions without which the entire ecosystem would collapse, a reality recognized in traditional Nibenay cosmology that acknowledges interdependence rather than hierarchy as fundamental natural principle. The religious significance of the Nibenay Valley adds another dimension to its regional importance, with water-centered spiritual practices representing perhaps the most distinctive element of traditional Nibenay's culture. The Chapel of Mara in Bravil emphasizes aspects of the goddess, particularly relevant to riverside community. Her associations with natural cycles and fertility finding expression in rituals timing significant life events to river patterns, while her aspects as mother figure connect symbolically to the Nibenay itself as life-giving force nourishing entire region. Beyond formal imperial cult observances, numerous local traditions maintain practices clearly predating Alessian religious reforms, particularly regarding river spirits, water-based purification rituals, and ceremonies marking transition points in seasonal flood cycles. Human interaction with this productive environment has evolved substantially since the First Era, when early settlers viewed the valley primarily through lens of agricultural potential and transportation convenience. Initial approaches often attempted to control or eliminate wetland characteristics through drainage projects and channelization efforts, reflecting imported assumptions about proper landscape rather than understanding of local environmental functions. Over generations, more sophisticated relationship developed as experience demonstrated both practical benefits of working with natural cycles and negative consequences of excessive modification attempts. By the Third Era, traditional Nibenay river management reflected this accumulated wisdom, combining selective infrastructure development with deliberate preservation of natural systems, providing essential services, levees protected settlements, and key agricultural areas from the most extreme flood events, while allowing controlled inundation of designated floodplains where annual sediment deposition maintains soil fertility. Fishing practices incorporated awareness of spawning cycles and habitat requirements, with seasonal restrictions and designated preservation areas, maintaining stock viability despite significant harvesting pressure. And wetland resources, from medicinal plants to unique crafting materials, receive protection through both formal imperial conservation edicts and informal community management systems, evolved over centuries of practical experience. Throughout smaller settlements, religious expression often incorporates elements recognizable as descended from ancient Nedic water worship, Aelid environmental practices, and even concepts adopted from Argonian traditions in neighboring Black Marsh. Syncretistic approach, characteristic of Nibenay culture that incorporates useful or meaningful elements from diverse sources rather than maintaining rigid doctrinal boundaries. This adaptive approach sometimes creates tension with more orthodox imperial religious authorities, but generally remains tolerated through combination of physical distance from central oversight and pragmatic recognition that these practices support social cohesion in challenging environmental context where community cooperation proves essential for survival. Conversely, the valley's distinctive environment provided certain advantages during crisis conditions. The numerous waterways offered evacuation routes when land travel became dangerous, allowing riverside communities to move populations quickly when threatened. Traditional knowledge of hidden locations within labyrinthine wetlands, places normally used for hunting, gathering, or temporary fishing camps, provided refuge options beyond obvious settlements that Daedric forces targeted preferentially, and the self-sufficient survival skills maintained through ordinary wetland living proved invaluable when normal supply systems temporarily collapsed, with fishing, gathering, and small-scale cultivation allowing many communities to sustain themselves despite isolation from imperial support networks. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Nibenay Valley faced unique challenges stemming from its dispersed settlement pattern and difficult terrain. Unlike regions with concentrated populations and clear defensive positions, the valley's scattered communities spread across semi-aquatic environment complicated both early warning systems and coordinated resistance efforts. Oblivion gates opening in wetland areas often remained undetected longer than those in more populated regions, while waterways that normally facilitated transportation and communication occasionally channeled Daedric forces directly into vulnerable settlements before effective response could mobilize. For travelers exploring the Nibenay Valley today, certain experiences remain essential to understanding its distinctive character. The journey by boat along the Niben itself, watching landscapes transition from urban development around the Imperial City through agricultural zones to increasingly wild wetlands approaching Bravil, offers perfect introduction to the region's graduated relationship between human activity and natural systems. The distinctive sensory aspects of valley life create equally powerful impressions. The particular quality of light reflected from water surfaces that illuminates riverside buildings with constantly shifting patterns, the complex aromatic mixture of wetland vegetation, aquatic life, and the distinctive petrichor released when seasonal rains first touch soil, exposed during drier periods. The remarkable acoustics of environments where water simultaneously absorbs certain sounds while transmitting others with uncanny clarity across distances. The post-crisis period brought both recovery challenges and opportunities to the Nibenay Valley, with reconstruction efforts acknowledging the region's distinctive character rather than imposing standardized approaches developed for different environments. Imperial engineers working on damaged infrastructure incorporated local knowledge regarding flood patterns and water movement, creating more resilient systems than had existed before the crisis. Agricultural recovery progressed relatively quickly in areas where seasonal inundation continued normal nutrient renewal processes, allowing faster return to productivity than regions dependent on human-applied fertilization, and the valley's natural abundance provided crucial resources during broader provincial recovery, with wetland harvests supplying food, medicine, and materials to areas experiencing more severe scarcity. Breville itself weathered the crisis better than many observers expected, given its pre-existing challenges, with the city's social adaptability proving unexpected strength during extraordinary circumstances. Despite minimal effective leadership from Count Terentius, neighborhood-level organization quickly developed practical response systems, combining elements from criminal networks' existing communication methods, Fighters Guild defensive expertise, and community knowledge of local conditions. The resulting hybrid approach lacked clear authority structures or consistent methodology, but demonstrated remarkable effectiveness in identifying threats, moving vulnerable populations to safer locations, and maintaining basic necessities throughout crisis period. As we leave the intricate waterways and wetlands of the Nibenay Valley, carrying with us appreciation for the fluid relationship between land, water, and human communities that defines this distinctive region, we turn our attention eastward once more to the rugged heights and cultural frontiers of the Valles Mountains, a borderland whose challenging terrain and proximity to Morrowind has created yet another unique facet of Cyrodiil's remarkably diverse provincial identity. The valley's food traditions provide particularly direct connection to its environmental character, dishes combining river fish with wild harvested plants, unavailable elsewhere in Tamriel, create flavors unique to the region, while cooking techniques evolved specifically for ingredients found within local ecosystems demonstrate cultural adaptation to place refined over countless generations. The beverages complement this culinary distinctiveness, from mild fermented drinks made from specific wetland grains to the potent Niben brandies developed to preserve seasonal fruit harvests through winter periods, each reflecting particular aspects of local environment, transformed through human ingenuity into cultural expressions that simultaneously sustain body and connect consumers to place through sensory experience. Perhaps most profound for understanding the Nibenay Valley's essential character is recognizing the philosophical perspective embedded within traditional river culture, a worldview that accepts continuous change as fundamental reality rather than aberration requiring resistance. The river exists in perpetual motion, simultaneously constant in its presence, yet never precisely identical from one moment to next. Communities adapted to this environment incorporate this understanding into their cultural foundations, developing approaches to challenges that emphasize flexibility, adaptation, and working with inevitable transformations rather than futile attempts to prevent all change. This perspective, sometimes misinterpreted by outsiders as passivity or fatalism, actually represents sophisticated response to environmental realities, creating sustainable relationship between human communities and dynamic natural systems that has maintained continuity despite countless individual transformations across centuries. Chapter 7. The Valles Mountains. Along Cyrodiil's eastern border, Forming the natural boundary between the Imperial Province and Morrowind, rise the Vallis Mountains, a formidable range whose rugged peaks and isolated valleys have created distinctive environment where cultures meet, minerals concentrate, and hardy communities develop, character shaped by both geological challenges and proximity to non-imperial influences. Unlike the higher, more jagged Jeralls to the north, or the gentle hills of the West Weald, the Vallis present intermediate elevation profile, substantial mountains, whose passes remain traversable year-round in most locations, creating borderland that functions as semi-permeable membrane between provinces, rather than absolute barrier. The mountains themselves formed during the same ancient geological upheavals that created most of Tamriel's major ranges, though subsequent volcanic activity associated with nearby Red Mountain periodically added younger features to the predominantly ancient formations. The resulting landscape combines dramatic exposed rock faces, where erosion has revealed multicolored strata recording millions of years of geological history, dense forests occupying sheltered valleys where soil accumulation supports vibrant ecosystems, and numerous caves and underground systems where water and volcanic processes have created extensive subterranean environments with their own distinctive ecological communities. Perhaps most significant for human interaction with this environment is the range's extraordinary mineral wealth, particularly deposits of high-quality iron, silver, ebony, and various gemstones concentrated where ancient volcanic activity forced these materials upward from deep below Nirn's surface. These resources have attracted mining operations since earliest recorded history, with evidence suggesting extraction activities predating even Aelid control of the region. The resulting industry has shaped both physical landscape through generations of tunneling, excavation, and processing activities, and human geography through establishment of communities specifically positioned to access and process these valuable materials. At the northern extent of the Vallis Range stands Cheydinhal, the easternmost major city in Cyrodiil, and the primary urban center serving the province's border with Morrowind. Unlike the distinctively imperial architecture of the capital or the Nordic influences visible in Bruma, Cheydinhal presents unmistakable Dunmer aesthetic elements, notably the high, narrow proportions of major buildings, distinctive arched windows, and decorative motifs showing clear dark elven cultural inspiration. This architectural character reflects the city's significant Dunmer population, immigrants and their descendants who maintain cultural connections to nearby Morrowind, while functioning as fully integrated imperial citizens. The city straddles the Corbelow River, where it emerges from mountain valleys to begin its journey westward toward eventually joining the Nibenay, with distinct districts developing on each bank, connected by several stone bridges. The eastern districts house primarily Dunmer residents and businesses catering to their specific cultural preferences, while western neighborhoods maintain more typical imperial character, though with noticeable Dunmer influences throughout. This arrangement creates not segregation, but graduated cultural transition, physical manifestation of the city's fundamental factor as meeting place between distinct traditions that maintain their integrity while engaging in productive exchange. Cheydinhal's governance during the late Third Era resided with Count Anvil Inderes, a Dunmer nobleman whose position represented significant milestone in imperial Morrowind relations, as he was the only non-imperial count in Cyrodiil during this period. His administration balanced responsibilities to imperial authority against sensitivity to the city's unique cultural composition, maintaining policies that officially upheld imperial law while allowing considerable practical flexibility in how various communities regulated their internal affairs. This approach generally succeeded in promoting stability and intercultural cooperation, though periodically generating tension when broader imperial policies conflicted with deeply held Dunmer traditional practices. Beyond the city walls, human settlement throughout the Valis region follows patterns dictated by the conjunction of resource availability, defensive considerations, and transportation practicality. Mining communities typically develop as close as possible to the actual extraction sites, while maintaining access to water and defensible positions against both natural hazards and historical threats. Agricultural settlements occupy the limited arable valleys where soil quality and growing seasons support crop production, typically focusing on hardy varieties adapted to the relatively short mountain growing season. And trading posts establish themselves at strategic locations along the limited road network connecting these specialized communities with broader markets in both Cyrodiil and Morrowind. The ecology of the Valis Mountains reflects the transitional nature of the range as geographical feature connecting distinct environmental regions. The western slopes and lower elevations support ecosystems similar to eastern Cyrodiil's general patterns, with deciduous forests dominated by oak, maple, and ash, transitioning to pine and fir at higher elevations. The eastern slopes and valleys sometimes demonstrate characteristics more typical of neighboring Morrowind, particularly in areas where volcanic soil influences plant communities or where thermal features create microclimates supporting species normally found farther east. This ecological gradient creates extraordinary biodiversity within relatively small geographical area, different valleys sometimes harboring distinct species assemblages based on subtle variations in elevation, orientation, soil chemistry, and moisture patterns. Wildlife similarly reflects this transitional character, with typical Cyrodiilic species like deer, wolves, and bears sharing territory with creatures more commonly associated with Morrowind, such as cliff racers occasionally crossing the mountains during seasonal migrations, or niche populations establishing themselves in particularly sheltered eastern valleys with appropriate environmental conditions. This overlapping distribution creates unique management challenges for hunters, travelers, and communities throughout the region, as knowledge appropriate for one area may prove dangerously incomplete when applied to locations just a few miles away, but supporting significantly different ecological communities. Most distinctive among Valis wildlife are the mountain coyote, subspecies adapted to higher elevations and cooler conditions than their Morrowind relatives, developing heavier fur and more efficient metabolisms that allow survival through mountain winters. These powerful omnivores typically avoid human settlements, but occasionally cause significant problems for mining operations or isolated farmsteads, particularly during late winter periods when normal food sources become depleted. Their management represents one of many areas where Dunmer traditional knowledge has proven valuable even within Imperial administrative context, as dark elven hunting techniques specifically developed for dealing with coyote consistently outperform approaches based on experience with other large Cyrodiilic predators. The human cultures of the Valis region demonstrate similar patterns of overlap, adaptation, and synthesis between distinct traditions. The communities with predominantly imperial heritage maintain core elements of Colovian or Nibenay cultural identity, while incorporating practical adaptations learned from Dunmer neighbors, architectural techniques better suited to mountain conditions, cultivation methods appropriate for the distinctive volcanic soils found throughout parts of the range, or medicinal practices utilizing plants familiar to Dunmer healers, but not traditionally incorporated into imperial alchemical traditions. Conversely, Dunmer communities throughout the Valis region generally preserve fundamental elements of dark elven culture, ancestor veneration practices, distinctive artistic traditions, and family structures organized around traditional Great House principles, while adapting to broader imperial legal frameworks and economic systems. This adaptation typically produces neither complete assimilation nor rigid separation, but dynamic equilibrium, where multiple cultural traditions coexist through practical accommodations and mutual recognition of shared interests, despite maintained differences in certain fundamental values and perspectives. This cultural interplay manifests, perhaps most visibly in religious practice throughout the region. The Chapel of Arche in Cheydinhal represents official imperial cult worship, with particular emphasis on aspects of the god associated with life cycles and proper treatment of the dead, focus that resonates with traditional Dunmer concerns regarding ancestors and appropriate funerary practices. Alongside this imperial institution, numerous smaller shrines and household worship spaces maintain elements of traditional Dunmer religious expression, particularly regarding the tribunal and ancestor veneration, adapted to contexts where these practices no longer receive state support as they would within Morrowind proper. The resulting religious landscape demonstrates remarkable flexibility within seemingly rigid doctrinal systems. Imperial priests might acknowledge tribunal saints as particularly blessed individuals within broader divine framework rather than gods themselves, while Dunmer religious authorities often present ancestral connections as complementary to, rather than competitive, with imperial divine worship. This theological diplomacy, finding conceptual frameworks that allow distinct traditions to coexist without requiring either to surrender core principles, exemplifies the practical approach to cultural difference characteristic of borderland regions throughout history. The economic foundation of the Valis region rests primarily on resource extraction, particularly mining operations that have operated continuously in some locations since the First Era. The range's extraordinary mineral wealth includes massive iron deposits that supply significant portion of Cyrodiil's metallurgical industries, silver veins, whose purity rivals those found in Skyrim's most productive mines, and scattered deposits of rarer materials, including ebony, moonstone, and various gemstones, whose value justifies the considerable challenges of extraction in difficult mountain conditions. The processing of these materials creates secondary economic activities throughout the region. Smelting operations transform raw ore into workable metals, with larger facilities typically located where water power can drive bellows and hammers, while smaller operations sometimes utilize volcanic features providing natural heat sources. Refineries process gemstones from rough specimens to polished products ready for setting by jewelers throughout the empire, and numerous supporting industries from charcoal production to specialized tool manufacturing develop around these primary activities, creating integrated economic communities where multiple operations maintain interdependent relationships. Trade routes connecting these productive centers with markets both west into central Cyrodiil and east into Morrowind add another dimension to regional economic activity. Professional caravan operations maintain regular schedules along the limited road network linking major communities, while more specialized transporters develop expertise in moving particular goods through challenging terrain where standard routes prove inadequate. This transportation infrastructure benefits not just mining products, but agricultural output from mountain valleys, medicinal herbs, and alchemical ingredients harvested from specialized ecological niches and manufactured goods produced by artisans throughout the region. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Valus region faced distinctive challenges stemming from both its mountainous terrain and its position along provincial border. The limited road network and scattered settlement pattern complicated coordination of defensive efforts, while jurisdictional questions occasionally created confusion regarding whether Imperial or Morrowind authorities held primary responsibility for particular border areas threatened by Daedric incursion. These factors sometimes delayed effective response during critical early stages of specific Daedric attacks, allowing establishment of Oblivion gates that proved difficult to neutralize once fully manifested. Conversely, the region's long experience with practical cooperation across cultural and political boundaries became significant strength once initial coordination challenges resolved. Mixed patrols combining Imperial Legion forces with House Dunmer warriors proved particularly effective against Daedric threats, blending distinct combat traditions and magical approaches into comprehensive response capabilities. Mining communities contributed specialized expertise regarding underground operations when Daedric forces established positions in cave systems, while traditional Dunmer knowledge concerning certain types of Daedric entities supplemented Imperial understanding in ways that improved tactical responses to specific threats. Cheydinhal itself experienced significant but not catastrophic impact during the crisis, with the city's substantial walls and disciplined guard force preventing the kind of overwhelming assault that destroyed Kvatch. Count Indari's leadership during this period receives mixed historical assessment. His personal courage in defense of the city earning widespread respect, while certain administrative decisions regarding resource allocation and civilian evacuation generated controversy, both during and after the immediate crisis period. The city's survival with relatively minimal structural damage, despite several determined Daedric attacks, speaks to effective overall defense coordination regardless of specific criticisms regarding particular elements of the response strategy. The post-crisis period brought substantial reconstruction challenges to the Valus region, with mining operations requiring extensive rehabilitation after Daedric interference and transportation infrastructure needing significant repairs to restore normal economic functioning. These efforts progressed relatively quickly compared to some other regions due to the area's strong existing resource base and practical cooperative traditions that facilitated efficient allocation of limited reconstruction resources across cultural and jurisdictional boundaries. Within 5 years of the crisis conclusion, most mines had returned to full production and trade routes had been substantially restored, though certain psychological impacts, particularly regarding activities in deep underground environments where Daedric forces had been particularly difficult to dislodge, persisted considerably longer. For travelers exploring the Valus region today, certain experiences remain essential to understanding its distinctive character. The view from Cheydinhal's eastern gate, looking into the mountains where distinctively Cyrodiilic landscapes transition toward geological features more characteristic of neighboring Morrowind, offers visual encapsulation of the region's fundamental nature as convergent zone between different environmental and cultural systems. The sensory aspects of areas with active volcanic influence create equally powerful impressions. The distinctive mineral tang that permeates air near thermal features, the occasional tremors that remind visitors of dynamic geological processes continuing beneath surface appearances of stability, and the remarkable visual contrasts where volcanic soil chemistry creates vegetation patterns strikingly different from surrounding areas. Perhaps most significant for understanding the Valus Mountain's essential character is recognizing how the region embodies principles of productive tension between opposing influences, a place where differing traditions maintain distinct identities while engaging in continuous dialogue through practical coexistence and cooperation. Neither fully imperial nor completely aligned with Morrowind cultural patterns, the communities throughout these mountains demonstrate how borderlands often generate their own distinctive identities precisely through integration of elements from multiple sources, creating not diluted versions of neighboring cultures, but new syntheses with their own internal coherence and resilience. The mines themselves present another essential regional experience: the opportunity to observe human engagement with geological processes operating on timescales far beyond ordinary perception. To descend into well-developed mining operation is to travel not just downward in space but backward in time, moving through layers of stone representing millions of years of geological history, while simultaneously witnessing evidence of human activity spanning centuries or occasionally millennia of continuous extraction efforts. This juxtaposition between human and geological timescales creates perspective particularly appropriate to mountain environments, where the seemingly solid and permanent landscapes themselves represent merely transient manifestations of ongoing processes that continuously reshape Nirn's surface through forces operating far beyond human ability to significantly influence or control. As we leave the rugged slopes and cultural borderlands of the Valus Mountains, carrying with us appreciation for the productive synthesis between different traditions that defines this fascinating region, we turn our attention finally to Cyrodiil's central heartlands, the open plains, scattered woodlands, and interconnecting waterways that form the province's geographical center and the immediate surroundings of the Imperial City itself. Though less dramatically distinctive than the specialized environments we have explored thus far, these central territories represent the connective tissue binding Cyrodiil's diverse regions into coherent whole, the shared spaces through which people, goods, ideas, and influences circulate throughout the province that forms the Empire's heart. Chapter 8: The Heartlands. Surrounding the Imperial City in all directions, and extending outward to the various regions we have explored, the Heartlands of Cyrodiil form the geographic and cultural center of the province, a diverse yet cohesive territory of rolling plains, scattered woodlands, fertile farmlands, and interconnected waterways that serves as both the physical core of the Imperial province and the symbolic heart of the Empire itself. Unlike regions defined by extreme or specialized environments, the Heartlands represent more balanced landscape where multiple ecological communities intermingle, creating natural diversity that parallels the cultural and political centrality of this pivotal territory. The fundamental geography of the Heartlands revolves around Lake Rumir and the various waterways connecting to it, particularly the White Rose River flowing from the west and the Nibenay continuing southward from the lake's eastern shore. These water systems create natural transportation network, linking the region internally while connecting it to distant territories, establishing pattern of movement and commerce that predates even human civilization in Cyrodiil. Around these waterways extend the fertile plains that have supported intensive agriculture since earliest recorded history, producing the consistent food surpluses that enabled development of the continent's most sophisticated urban civilization. This agricultural productivity derives from combination of favorable natural conditions and centuries of careful human management. The climate features moderate seasonal variation without the extremes found in northern mountains or southern coastlands, allowing extended growing season for diverse crops. The soils benefit from complex geological history, where multiple rock types weather into balanced composition, supporting varied agricultural applications. And the hydrology provides reliable water availability through both natural precipitation patterns and the numerous streams and rivers that permit irrigation during occasional drier periods. Human settlement throughout the Heartlands follows patterns established through centuries of development, with security, agricultural productivity, and transportation access traditionally serving as primary factors determining community locations. The most significant settlements typically occupy positions along major roads or waterways, particularly at intersection points where multiple transportation routes converge. Smaller communities generally develop around specific resources or productive agricultural zones, creating a network of interdependent settlements ranging from substantial towns through modest villages to isolated farming estates and enterprises focused on specialized production. Unlike the major cities that serve as focal points for other Cyrodiilic regions, the Heartlands beyond the Imperial City itself feature a more distributed pattern where numerous smaller settlements collectively provide administrative, commercial, and social functions without single dominant center overshadowing all others. Towns like Y, at the western end of Lake Rumar's bridge system, Pell's Gate, along the Green Road south of the Imperial City, or Aliswell, on the Red Ring Road, all maintain importance disproportionate to their physical size due to strategic positions within transportation and trade networks. This settlement pattern creates more even distribution of population and resources throughout the region, with services and opportunities available across broader territory rather than concentrated exclusively in provincial capitals as seen elsewhere. The architecture throughout the Heartlands demonstrates similar balance between practical functionality and symbolic expression of imperial identity. Government buildings, chapels, and other official structures typically follow classical imperial design principles, with their emphasis on symmetry, proportion, and visual references to ancient traditions. Domestic and commercial construction shows greater regional variation while maintaining core elements of imperial building traditions, stone foundations supporting timber framing in most locations, with specific materials and stylistic details varying based on local resources and historical influences specific to particular communities. The ecology of the Heartlands presents fascinating study in transitional environments and interconnected systems. Unlike specialized ecosystems adapted to extreme conditions, the region supports diverse ecological communities existing in dynamic relationship with each other and with human activities that have shaped the landscape for millennia. The resulting environment blends natural and cultural elements so thoroughly that distinguishing between them often proves impossible. A landscape where human presence represents not disruption of pristine nature, but integral component in complex systems that have co-evolved through centuries of interaction. The woodlands scattered throughout the region exemplify this integrated character. Unlike the ancient forest ecosystems of northern territories, Heartland woodlots typically represent managed environments where human harvesting, planting, and protection activities have shaped tree species composition and structural characteristics for generations. These woods nonetheless support remarkable biodiversity by providing habitat islands within agricultural matrix, allowing woodland species to maintain viable populations throughout the region despite fragmented distribution. The management systems developed through centuries of practical experience balance resource extraction against habitat maintenance with sophistication that few outside observers fully appreciate. Similarly integrated systems appear in the region's waterways, where fish populations have adapted to millennia of human harvesting through complex and often subtle changes in behavior and life history patterns. Species like the Rumeray silverside, small, fast-growing fish, harvested in enormous numbers throughout the lake and connecting rivers, have developed reproductive strategies specifically adapted to harvesting pressure, with earlier maturation and more frequent spawning than related species in less intensively utilized water bodies. These adaptations allow maintenance of both ecological function and human resource availability through balanced relationship that neither eliminates human use nor depletes the underlying biological systems supporting it. The wildlife beyond these managed systems maintains equally complex relationships with human communities and activities. Deer populations throughout the Heartlands have adapted to agricultural landscapes by adjusting feeding patterns, reproductive timing, and movement behaviors to maximize benefits from human-created environments while minimizing exposure to hunting pressure. Predator species, including wolves and mountain lions, persist in reduced but stable populations, primarily in the less densely settled territories where forestry rather than intensive agriculture dominates land use, and countless smaller mammals, birds, and other creatures find niches throughout the mosaic landscape, often benefiting from the habitat diversity that mixed human-natural systems create when managed with appropriate understanding and restraint. Human cultures throughout the Heartlands reflect similar processes of integration and synthesis, with the region historically serving as melting pot, where traditions from Cyrodiil's diverse territories and beyond intermingle to create distinctively imperial identity. The resulting cultural landscape balances cosmopolitan diversity against shared core values and practices, an equilibrium that allows both individual expression and collective coherence necessary for stable, functional society spanning tremendous geographical and cultural territory. This balancing act appears perhaps most clearly in religious practice throughout the region. The chapel system, representing official imperial cult worship, maintains consistent doctrines and ceremonial elements across all communities, providing shared framework for spiritual expression regardless of specific location or population composition. Alongside this formal religion, numerous local traditions maintain practices adapted to particular community needs and histories, harvest festivals with elements clearly predating the empire, specialized observances related to specific local industries or environmental conditions, and household rituals passed through generations with minimal official oversight or standardization. The resulting religious landscape demonstrates remarkable flexibility within seemingly formal system, a practical arrangement where official imperial religion accommodates substantial local variation without requiring formal acknowledgement of divergence from standard practices. This approach sacrifices absolute doctrinal consistency for functional integration across diverse communities, creating a system where relatively abstract theological principles maintain constancy while specific observances adapt to particular contexts and needs. The practical effectiveness of this approach appears in the remarkable stability of imperial religious institutions across centuries, despite substantial political and cultural changes affecting other aspects of provincial life. Economic activity throughout the Heartlands demonstrates equally sophisticated balance between specialization and integration, with the region's central position facilitating exchange systems that connect diverse production centers into coherent whole. Agricultural operations range from massive estate farms producing grain, livestock, or specialized crops for broader markets through mixed family farms supplying diverse products, primarily to local communities. Craft production similarly spans spectrum from specialized workshops, creating high-value goods for export to village-level crafters, meeting basic local needs, and commercial enterprises from sophisticated banking houses to humble peddlers, facilitate exchanges, binding these diverse producers and consumers into interdependent economic community. This economic complexity receives physical expression through the remarkable road network centered on the Imperial City and extending outward like wheel spokes to connect the Heartlands with all other Cyrodiilic regions. The Red Ring Road encircling Lake Bruma forms literal and symbolic center with the major routes: Black Road to the northwest, Silver Road to the northeast, Gold Road to the west, Green Road to the south, and Yellow Road to the east, creating primary transportation arteries connecting the capital with provincial cities. Between these major highways, numerous secondary roads and countless local paths create capillary system, allowing movement between even the smallest settlements, binding the region into integrated whole despite its considerable geographical extent. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Heartlands experienced particularly severe impact due to the region's strategic significance and proximity to the ultimate target of Daedric invasion, the Imperial City itself. The open terrain provided limited natural defensive positions, allowing Daedric forces establishing beachheads through Oblivion gates to move quickly against settlements and transportation routes. The dense population and intensive development concentrated valuable targets within relatively small territories, creating efficient targeting opportunities for Daedric strategists focusing on maximizing destruction and disruption. And the region's central position in provincial transportation networks meant that damage here disproportionately affected movement and communication throughout Cyrodiil, amplifying the practical impact of even localized Daedric successes. Numerous smaller settlements throughout the Heartlands suffered complete destruction during the crisis, with communities like Hackdirt and Aliswell effectively ceasing to exist as organized human habitations following Daedric attacks that left few survivors and minimal salvageable infrastructure. Even locations that avoided direct assault often experienced severe secondary effects through disruption of normal trade patterns, arrival of refugee populations, straining limited resources, and psychological impacts, creating social disruption even in physically intact communities. The cumulative effect created most severe overall devastation since the Alessian slave rebellion overthrew Aelid rule thousands of years earlier, historical inflection point whose significance continues reverberating through Cyrodiilic society generations after the actual conflict ended. The post-crisis reconstruction period brought both unprecedented challenges and extraordinary opportunities to reshape aspects of regional development that had evolved incrementally for centuries. Imperial planners, balancing limited resources against enormous rebuilding needs, made difficult decisions regarding which settlements would receive priority assistance, which transportation routes would see earliest restoration, and which aspects of pre-crisis infrastructure would be modified rather than simply replaced. These choices inevitably advantaged certain communities and interests over others, creating winners and losers whose relative positions sometimes shifted dramatically compared to pre-crisis arrangements. New settlements developed where destroyed communities had stood, often with significantly different characteristics than their predecessors. Farmers adjusted crop patterns based on changed market conditions and altered environmental circumstances in areas experiencing lingering effects from Daedric corruption. Transportation routes shifted to accommodate new settlement patterns and security considerations identified during crisis experiences. And social structures evolved as communities incorporated refugee populations, adapted to leadership changes following crisis casualties, and developed new cultural elements reflecting shared experiences during extraordinarily traumatic historical moment. For travelers exploring the Heartlands today, the legacy of these transformative events remains visible alongside the region's fundamental characteristics that transcend even such significant historical disruptions. The view from atop Empire Bridge crossing Lake Bruma, with the Imperial City's white gold tower dominating the central island, while settlements and agricultural lands extend outward along the shorelines, offers perfect visual encapsulation of the relationship between central authority and distributed activity that defines imperial governance at its most effective. The journey along any major road leading outward from the capital demonstrates the graduated transition from urban density through suburbs and satellite communities to rural territories that maintain distinctive local identities while participating in broader provincial systems. The agricultural landscapes themselves reward thoughtful observation, revealing centuries of accumulated knowledge and adaptation encoded in field patterns, crop rotations, water management systems, and settlement distributions that collectively represent perhaps the most sophisticated agricultural tradition on the continent. Each element, from irrigation channels following topographical contours with mathematical precision to woodlot placements, providing both timber resources and windbreaks, protecting adjacent fields, reflects practical solutions developed through generations of experience with specific local conditions, creating integrated systems whose efficiency and sustainability far exceed what casual observation might suggest. The people themselves perhaps best embody the Heartland's essential character: population neither homogeneously imperial nor clearly divided into distinct cultural groups, but dynamic mixture where diverse influences combine into flexible yet coherent social fabric. Individuals throughout the region typically identify simultaneously with multiple overlapping communities, their specific settlement, their occupational group, their ancestral heritage, and their status as imperial citizens, creating layered identities that accommodate both particular attachments and broader affiliations necessary for functional multicultural society. This practical integration without enforced uniformity represents the social parallel to the region's ecological character as zone where multiple systems maintain distinct integrity while functioning as components within larger whole. This capacity for maintaining both diversity and coherence, for preserving particular characteristics while participating in broader systems, represents perhaps the Heartland's most significant contribution to imperial civilization. In region where Colovian and Nibenay traditions intermingle without either achieving absolute dominance, where agricultural and urban lifestyles maintain interdependent relationship rather than hierarchical ordering, where official institutions and informal arrangements operate in parallel without constant conflict, we see manifestation of the fundamental principles that enabled Cyrodiilic civilization to expand beyond single culture or territory, to incorporate diverse peoples and regions, while maintaining functional integration across unprecedented geographical and cultural expanses. As we conclude our journey through Cyrodiil's diverse landscapes, from the magnificent Imperial City through distinctive regional territories, and finally returning to these central heartlands that bind the province into cohesive whole, perhaps the most profound understanding emerges from recognizing how these various environments and cultures combine to create entity greater than sum of individual components. The province succeeds not through enforced homogeneity, but through balanced integration of diverse elements. System, where specialized regional adaptations provide resilience and flexibility, while shared frameworks enable coordination and collective action when circumstances require unified response. The land itself, in all its remarkable diversity, from snow-capped mountains through ancient forests to fertile plains and productive wetlands, provides both foundation and metaphor for the human systems developed upon it. Just as no single ecosystem or landscape type dominates the province completely, no single cultural approach or governance model achieves absolute precedence over alternatives. The resulting complexity might appear chaotic to superficial observation, but closer examination reveals sophisticated balance between autonomy and integration, between specialization and cooperation, between individual expression and collective identity, that represents Cyrodiil's most remarkable achievement and the true source of imperial resilience across centuries of challenges, changes, and occasional catastrophes. And so concludes our journey through the landscapes and cities of Cyrodiil, the heart of an empire, and the stage upon which the drama of the Oblivion crisis unfolded. From the gleaming spires of the Imperial City to the snow-covered settlements of the Jerall Mountains, from the coastal harbors of the Gold Coast to the ancient forests and mysterious wetlands that define the province's natural character, we have wandered the length and breadth of this remarkable land. As the embers of our fire burn low, I hope these tales have painted vivid pictures in your mind, images of places where history and geography intertwine, where diverse peoples have created communities that reflect both their unique cultural heritage and their shared identity as citizens of the Empire. In our next gathering, we will explore the creatures and wildlife of Cyrodiil, from the mundane to the magical, from the benign to the terrifying. We will discover the beasts that roam the wilderness beyond city walls, the entities that emerge from realms beyond mortal understanding, and the complex ecological relationships that maintain balance in a world where nature and magic exist in constant dialogue. Until then, may the landscapes we've explored together visit you in peaceful dreams, and may you find rest as gentle as a summer evening in the West Weald, as deep as the ancient roots of the great forest, as refreshing as the cool waters of Lake Rumer. Sleep well, travelers and dreamers. Sleep well.